This week was packed with chills, rules, and moments that left our listeners staring at the shadows a little longer than usual. From haunted libraries to cursed hospital wings, these are the top creepypasta stories that had everyone talking. If you missed anything, or just want to relive the most terrifying moments, we've got you covered. Here are the best stories from this week on Night Creepypasta Rules. Turn off the lights. Turn up the volume. Let's dive in. They warned me the bar had rules. Not drink recipes, not safety codes. Rules for staying alive. Tonight's story isn't fiction. It's not folklore. And it sure as hell isn't just atmosphere. This is the Mourning Dove, an old bar in Georgia that doesn't just serve the living. And if you break the wrong rule, it serves you to something else. I'm a bartender here, and this is what happened my first week on the graveyard shift. Watch till the end, because there's a twist you won't see coming. And when it hits, you'll finally understand why the bar mirror never shows just your reflection. Drop a comment after the story. Tell me, which rule would you break first? And if you want more horror that breathes down your neck when the lights go out, subscribe. Because this is just one of the places that follows rules. The next one might not. Rent was due yesterday. My savings account contained little more than dust and regret. So when old Mr. Thorne, proprietor of the Mourning Dove, offered me the graveyard shift after a 5-minute interview that felt more like an assessment of my nerve than my bartending skills, I didn't hesitate. He'd mentioned the bar had character and a few essential house rules, his weary eyes scanning my face as if searching for cracks. I nodded, desperate, ignoring the faint alarm bells. Maybe I should have asked what kind of character, what kind of rules. The Savannah heat clung heavy and damp, even after sunset, smelling of cloying gardenias and the slow crawl of the nearby river, as I pushed open the Mourning Dove's heavy, dark wood door. Inside, the air conditioning sighed, creating a pocket of cool, almost clammy stillness that felt decades removed from the lively street outside. The bar was long and narrow, steeped in shadows that the low-wattage, amber-tinted lamps seemed hesitant to fully disturb. Dark wood panels, stained almost black with age and generations of cigar smoke, lined the walls. Behind the long, polished mahogany bar, rows of liquor bottles glinted like captured jewels in the gloom, reflected dimly in the vast, age-spotted mirror that ran the length of the back wall. It smelled predominantly of stale beer and whiskey, undercut by lemon polish fighting a losing battle against ingrained smoke, the mustiness of old wood, and something else, a faint, persistent undercurrent of damp earth, like a cellar long unopened. Right beneath the floorboards, a man detached himself from the shadows at the far end of the bar, wiping down the already gleaming surface with a slow, methodical rhythm that spoke of long habit. Elias Thorne. He looked older than his 60-odd years. His shoulders slumped with a weariness that seemed etched into his bones. His eyes, shadowed and pouched, held a deep fatigue that went beyond simple lack of sleep. I saw his gaze drift for a moment to a faded photograph tucked into the corner of the antique cash register, a black and white image of a smiling young woman, and a flicker of profound old sadness crossed his features before he turned his head. Attention fully to me. Clara, you're punctual. Good. His voice was a low rasp, like dry leaves skittering on pavement. The way he said rules sent a small, irrational chill down my spine. He gestured towards the only other person currently behind the bar, a woman perhaps a few years older than me, leaning against the back counter, scrolling idly through her phone with an air of carefully cultivated boredom. This is Sarah. Works most day shifts, sometimes closes if I need her. She knows the Dove better than I do, probably. Sarah glanced up, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. She offered a brief, assessing look, and a wry half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Means I know where Elias hides the good bourbon and which floorboards groan like dying old men, she said, her tone light. almost brittle. Best advice? Keep the customers happy. Keep your head down. And don't take anything that happens in here too personally. Especially after midnight. She gave her phone screen a final, sharp tap. But I noticed, just for a second, a slight tremor in her fingers before she quickly slid the device into her apron pocket. Her nonchalance feeling suddenly like a performance. My attention was drawn then to the sole customer present. An elderly gentleman seated ramrod straight at the far end of the bar, nursing a small glass of amber liquid. He was impeccably dressed in a slightly old-fashioned suit, despite the late hour. His silver hair neatly combed. His gaze wasn't fixed on his drink or the door. He seemed to be taking in the entire room with a quiet, steady, almost unnerving intensity. "That's Mr. Abernathy," Elias murmured, noticing my glance. He is Mr. Abernathy, part of the furniture. Comes in every night. Same drink, same seat." As if sensing our attention, the old man turned his head slightly and met my eyes across the dimly lit space. He gave a small, formal nod, a gesture of polite acknowledgement, yet his expression held something deeper, a searching look, tinged with what might have been concern, or perhaps even pity, that made my skin prickle unaccountably. Elias Thorne leaned closer then, resting his worn hands on the bar top, lowering his voice conspiratorially. The weariness in his eyes was momentarily eclipsed by a stark, absolute seriousness. "All right, Clara, listen close now. Forget most of what you learned tending bar elsewhere. Here, things are different. I'm not kidding around. These aren't suggestions. They aren't guidelines for good service. They are the rules. You follow them. To the letter. No exceptions. Do you understand?" The intensity radiating from him was palpable. I nodded, my throat suddenly tight and dry. "Rule 1, he began, his gaze steady, holding mine. "Sometimes, could be any night, someone might come in, sit right there at the bar, maybe when you're not looking. You won't recognize them. You'll be dead certain you've never laid eyes on them before. Doesn't matter. They'll ask for the usual. When they do, you pour them a standard measure of the house whiskey, neat, no ice, and no questions. Don't ask their name. Don't ask what the usual means. Don't comment if their clothes look 50 years out of date, or if they seem to appear out of thin air. Just pour the drink. Take the payment if they offer it. Sometimes they use old money, and then you find something else to do. Look away." A chill, cold and specific, traced its way down my spine despite the Savannah humidity clinging outside. Rule 2. He glanced towards the empty doorway as if expecting someone, then back at me, his voice even lower. Occasionally, the group might get lively, happy. Someone might raise a glass high and call out a toast. "To the living." If that happens, you do nothing. You hear me? Nothing. Don't raise your own glass. Don't nod in agreement. Don't smile politely. Don't even let your eyes acknowledge the toast. You turn away immediately. Wipe down the counter. Check the garnish tray. Become instantly incredibly busy with anything else. Do not engage with that specific toast. His gravity was unnerving. But why? The question slipped out before I could stop it. A bartender's ingrained habit of understanding the customer. His eyes hardened, losing the earlier sadness replaced by sheer steel. Rule 2 isn't ask why. Clara, Rule 2 is don't respond. Got it? I nodded quickly this time, feeling foolish, and suddenly very aware of the shadows in the corners of the room. And Rule 3, he leaned in even closer, his voice dropping to a barely audible murmur, forcing me to strain to hear him over the faint hum of the coolers. The jukebox, he nodded towards the hulking, chrome and wood machine, squatting in a deeply shadowed corner near the back, currently dark and silent. Most nights it plays blues, old jazz, maybe some soul. Nothing much newer than the 70s. But if it ever, on its own accord, starts playing a certain kind of tune, something brassy, Maybe a fast foxtrot, maybe a sad, slow waltz. Something that sounds unmistakably like it belongs in the roaring 20s. Specifically 1924. You drop... Whatever you are doing, you reach under the bar right here. He tapped a specific spot near the beer taps where I now noticed a heavy-duty industrial-looking switch. And you kill the main lights. All of them. Plunge the place into darkness immediately. Don't wait to finish pouring a drink. Don't ask questions. Just make it dark, fast as you can. He straightened up then, the intense focus receding slightly, leaving behind that profound, bone-deep weariness. He attempted a reassuring smile, but it was a thin, fragile thing that didn't quite reach his haunted eyes. Just those three. Follow them, Clara, and you'll settle in just fine. It's just atmosphere, character, as if punctuated by his hollow reassurance. The clean, heavy whiskey glass I had just placed upside down on a black rubber drying mat beside the sink slid smoothly and silently, a good 3 inches across the wet surface, stopping abruptly near the edge. My breath hitched in my throat. Sarah, beside me, polishing a glass with perhaps unnecessary vigor, didn't miss a beat, though her eyes carefully avoided looking directly at the moved glass. Counter must be warped right there, she commented, her voice deliberately casual, maybe a touch too high. She reached over with her cloth and nudged the glass back into its original position. Place is ancient, full of quirks, but it hadn't looked like a warp or a vibration from the street. It had looked deliberate, intentional, and the air around that specific spot on the mat felt suddenly, unnaturally cold against the back of my hand. Quirks. Right. The first hour crawled by in a haze of wiping down sticky counters and refilling garnished trays. The morning dove settled into its nightly rhythm. The low hum of the ancient coolers, the clink of ice, the murmur of conversation from the few early patrons. Mr. Abernathy nursed his drink silently at the far end, a fixture as unchanging as the dark wood grain beneath his glass. Routine, normalcy, almost enough to make me forget the unsettling introduction and Elias Thorne's grim warnings. Almost. Then, the rhythm broke. I turned from rinsing a shaker, and a man was suddenly there, perched on a stool near the middle of the bar where no one had been seconds before. He wasn't dripping rain, wasn't flushed from the Savannah heat. He just was. His suit seemed well kept but cut in a style decades out of fashion, his hat casting his face in deep shadow. Before I could offer a greeting, he spoke, his voice raspy, dry. The usual. My heart gave a painful jolt. Rule 1. Don't question it. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the house whiskey bottle, the cheap stuff, and poured a standard measure into a clean glass. Neat, no ice. I slid it across the polished mahogany towards him, deliberately avoiding eye contact, focusing instead on a non-existent smudge on the back bar mirror. He picked up the glass with long, pale fingers, downed the contents in one swift motion, and placed the empty glass back down with a soft click. A few coins appeared on the counter beside the glass. Heavy, oddly dull silver dollars bearing dates. I couldn't quite make out in the dim light. When I looked up again, steeling myself, the stool was empty. The man, his old suit, his shadowed face, gone, as if he'd evaporated into the stale, whiskey-scented air. My breath came out in a shaky gasp. I quickly pocketed the strange coins. They felt cold, wrong. Later, when Sarah drifted back from whatever task she'd been doing in the back, I asked her about it, my voice lower than intended. That man, who asked for the usual, Sarah barely glanced up from arranging bottles. Ah, one of them. Happens. Don't stare. Just pour. Best not to draw attention. She paused, then added, almost to herself, long as they don't bother me, they can have the whole damn bar. Her forced nonchalance didn't quite cover the flicker of something else. Fear? fear in her eyes before she turned away. Across the bar, Mr. Abernathy sighed softly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, his gaze distant and troubled. Just as I tried to shake off the deep unease, a new sound threaded through the bar's low murmur. Faint, tinny notes. Ragtime piano music, undeniably, seeming to emanate from the empty air near the back wall where the jukebox sat silent. It lasted only a few seconds, a cheerful ghost of a melody, before vanishing as abruptly as it began when I strained to pinpoint the source. No one else seemed to notice. A few minutes later, arranging coasters, I felt it. An intense patch of cold air lingering where the strange patron had sat, and the neat stack of coasters beside it looked subtly disturbed, as if someone had brushed against them. The rules weren't suggestions. The bar wasn't just old, it was fundamentally wrong. The pace picked up as the evening wore on. Tourists seeking authentic Savannah charm, regulars escaping the humidity, a few hushed couples in shadowy booths, the clink of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the low thrum of blues from the jukebox. It almost felt like a normal bartending gig. Almost. My nerves remained frayed, every unexpected movement or sound setting my teeth on edge. I was pulling a draft beer when a wave of boisterous laughter erupted from a group crowded near the center of the bar. They looked solid enough, maybe college kids or a bachelor party, loud and oblivious. One of them, face flushed, raised his glass high. "All right, folks," he bellowed, "a toast to the living." The words seemed to hang in the air, charged and heavy, silencing the immediate vicinity for a beat. Rule 2 screamed in my head. Every instinct urged me to smile politely, maybe raise the beer tap handle and mock salute. Instead, I forced myself to turn my back, heart pounding. I focused with fierce intensity on wiping down an already clean section of the bar, the repetitive motion a desperate anchor. Behind me, the air around the group seemed to drop several degrees. Their renewed laughter sounded hollow, forced, lacking the earlier drunken joy. It faded quickly as they paid and left, casting uneasy glances back at the bar. The whispers started shortly after, indistinct, sibilant, like escaping steam just beneath the threshold of hearing. Sometimes seeming to come from the empty stool beside Mr. Abernathy, sometimes from the dark corners near the ceiling. They felt personal, commenting, criticizing, mocking my fumbling attempts to make a cocktail, my forced smiles at customers. I glanced at the back bar mirror and froze. My own reflection seemed to flicker, momentarily replaced by the image of a woman with terrified eyes and dark bobbed hair from another era, before snapping back to my own pale face. I scrubbed at my eyes, blaming fatigue, stress. Later, reaching for a bottle of Old Tom gin, a request as antiquated as the bottle itself. I found it wasn't where I'd left it just minutes before. It sat a few inches to the left, label facing backwards. My skin crawled. "Did you move this gin, Sarah?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady when she passed by. She glanced at it, then at me, a knowing, almost pitying look in her eyes. "Guess they're feeling playful tonight," she shrugged, resuming her polishing. "Probably just messing with a new girl. Better the bottle than you, right? Don't let him see it bothers you." Her casual acceptance, her use of they, sent another wave of cold dread through me. She knew, and she accepted it. The crowd thinned after midnight. Soon, only Mr. Abernathy remained, nursing his seemingly eternal drink, and me wiping down tables, nerves stretched taut as piano wire. The blues tune playing softly on the jukebox finished, leaving a heavy silence broken only by the hum of the coolers and the distant sound of a siren outside. Then, a sharp crackle erupted from the jukebox speakers, followed by the unmistakable sound of a needle dropping onto vinyl, even though the machine hadn't been touched. A jaunty yet somehow melancholic, brassy tune filled the bar. A foxtrot, driven by a tinny piano and a mournful trumpet. Mr. Abernathy stiffened instantly, his head snapping up, eyes wide with something that looked like horrified recognition. "Dear God," he whispered, his voice thin and reedy. "That's Sweet Emmeline. Hadavan Brothers Orchestra, 1924. Rule 3, 1924. Turn off the lights." Panic surged, cold and immediate. My hands fumbled beneath the bar for the heavy switch Elias had shown me. Mr. Abernathy sat frozen, staring straight ahead, his knuckles white where he gripped his glass. I found the switch, slammed it down. The main lights cut out instantly, plunging the Mourning Dove into a thick, disorienting darkness, relieved only by the faint green glow of the exit sign and the weak moonlight filtering through the front window. The jukebox music continued, sounding louder, more insistent in the dark, and the other sounds began. Not outside, inside, all around us. The sharp, angry bark of male voices arguing, overlapping, the distinct sound of shattering glass, as if a tray of drinks had been dropped. A woman's terrified gasp, quickly cut off. A muffled thud, heavy and final. Shuffling footsteps moving quickly on bare wood, though the floor was carpeted now. The sound swirled, directionless. Echoes made tangible, bleeding through time. I pressed myself flat against the back of the bar, hardly daring to breathe, the darkness offering concealment, but no comfort. An icy draft, colder than any air conditioning, brushed against my cheek, carrying the faint coppery tang of old blood mixed with cheap perfume. Then, as suddenly as it started, the music from the jukebox scratched and died. The ghostly sounds ceased. Silence rushed back in, profound and deafening. After a long moment, the main lights flickered once, twice, then snapped back on, harsh and revealing. Mr. Abernathy looked 10 years older, his face gray, his body trembling slightly. He drained his glass in one gulp, something I hadn't seen him do before. The bar looked the same, empty glasses, dim lights, shadows. But the air felt wrong, violated, and that faint, coppery smell, mixed with stale perfume, lingered stubbornly near the center of the room, a ghostly testament to the violence that had briefly, terrifyingly, replayed itself in the dark. The coppery tang lingered in the air long after Mr. Abernathy had vanished into the savannah night, leaving me alone with the humming coolers and the ghosts, both literal and figurative. The events of the night, especially the spectral echoes summoned by that 1924 tune, left no room for doubt. This wasn't just a quirky bar. It was a wound in time, festering. And Elias Thorne's rules weren't about atmosphere. They were desperate, fraying stitches holding back an infection. My shift wouldn't end for hours. During a lull, fueled by cold fear and a desperate need for answers, I pulled out my phone, fingers flying across the screen, ignoring the tremor. "Sweet Emmeline, Haven Brothers Orchestra. I know each we had a canto star." Snippets emerged from the digital ether. Hazy local legends, mentions of a hidden back room during Prohibition, known for illicit gambling, and worse, whispers of a violent altercation. Names lost to time but associated with bad blood, betrayal, maybe a woman named Emmeline. The song itself was tied to tragic romance folklore. Enough pieces to form a grim, blood-stained mosaic. Sarah arrived near dawn for her opening prep, her usual cynical mask firmly in place. But today I saw the strain beneath it. The two bright eyes scanning the room with a nervous energy she couldn't quite conceal after last night. I waited until she was behind the relative privacy of the bar. "It's not just quirks, is it, Sarah?" I kept my voice low, but let the accusation harden it. The rules, the sounds last night, that smell. It's tied to 1924. Something violent happened here. Sarah stopped polishing a glass, her knuckles white. "Keep your voice down," she hissed, darting a look towards the empty room. "You don't know what you're messing with, don't I?" I pressed, emboldened by terror rather than courage. Rule 1. Serving ghosts their last drink. Rule 2. Ignoring a toast, because acknowledging the living angers the dead. Rule 3. Plunging the place into darkness, because a song triggers a goddamn massacre reenactment. I laid out the fragments I'd found online. A hidden speakeasy, a fight. People died here, didn't they? And you know. The cynical mask crumbled, replaced by raw, naked fear that made her look younger, more vulnerable, yet somehow more dangerous. "Okay. Yes. All right," she whispered fiercely, grabbing my arm. "People died here. Badly. Bootleggers, gamblers, some poor singer named Emmeline caught in the crossfire. They're stuck. They replay things. The rules." She shook her head frantically. "They're not perfect, but they manage it most of the time. Keep things stable-ish, predictable. Manage how? By not provoking them. By giving the usual ghost his whiskey so he moves on. By ignoring the ones who resent the living. By hiding in the dark when the worst memory surfaces." She gestured vaguely around the bar. "I leave out a little gin sometimes, near the back wall, where the old speakeasy door was. Seems to calm things down occasionally. Little routines. Don't make waves, so you just appease them. Live with it. What choice do we have?" Her voice cracked. "You think Thorne stays because he loves the smell of stale beer. It's a burden, a curse, and you digging around, asking questions, saying names aloud. You're stirring them up. You're stirring them up. You're breaking the routine, making it worse. You'll get us both killed." Her grip tightened on my arm. "Some doors are best left locked, Clara. Knowing more won't help you. It'll just paint a giant target on your back. And don't even think running away fixes anything. Once they know you," her eyes bored into mine, wide with terror. "Once they've really focused on you, they don't just forget because you moved to another state. They remember." As if summoned by her terrified warning, the temperature in the bar plummeted. An icy wind, smelling of damp earth, and that faint coppery tang, swept through the room, though the door remained closed. Bottles behind the bar rattled violently on their shelves. The lights flickered, dimmed, then flared unnaturally bright, casting harsh dancing shadows. "No," Sarah whimpered, backing away, letting go of my arm. "See, you did this." From the far end of the bar, where no one had been standing, a figure coalesced from the shadows. The man from the other night, the one who'd ordered the usual. But now his face wasn't entirely shadowed. His features were sharp, cruel, his eyes burning with a cold, dead light. He fixed those eyes on me. "Whiskey," he rasped, the sound like dragging stones. Now, before I could react, before Rule 1 even registered through the sheer terror, whispers erupted all around me, no longer indistinct, but sharp, clear, malicious. "Look who's asking questions. She knows your name, Emmeline." And colder still, a whisper that seemed to slither directly into my ear, referencing a specific painful memory from my own past. I'd never told anyone. Still running from that night, anyone? Still running from that night in it. "Atlanta, Clara." My blood ran cold. They knew me. Sarah screamed then, pointing not at the spectral patron, but at the massive mirror behind the bar. "Look away, Clara. Don't look." But it was too late. My gaze was drawn, horrified. The mirror's surface rippled like dark water. My own reflection stared back, pale and terrified. But behind me, overlaid like ghostly projections, the bar transformed. Flapper dresses shimmered, Men in sharp suits argued, faces contorted in anger. I saw a flash of polished steel, heard the deafening crack of a gunshot echo faintly, saw a woman crumple near where the jukebox now stood. The images flickered, nightmarish, bleeding into the present. Then, the main reflection, the figure of the man demanding whiskey, moved independently. It turned in the mirror, its dead eyes locking onto my mirrored eyes, and began to reach out, its spectral hand seeming to push through the rippling glass, reaching towards me in the real bar. "I told you not to look," Sarah shrieked, grabbing a heavy glass bottle from the counter and hurling it, not at the mirror, but towards me. "Don't let them take you." The bottle flew past my head as I ducked instinctively, trapped between Zara's panicked, dangerous interference and the horrifying figure emerging from the depths of the haunted mirror. The cold, dead hand reaching. The heavy glass bottle Sarah hurled sailed past my ear, shattering against the ornate back bar shelving with a sharp crack that momentarily seemed to stun the reaching apparition in the mirror. The spectral hand faltered. The coalescing shadow behind Maya flickered violently, and the intense pressure lessened just enough. Sarah didn't wait to see the outcome. With a choked sob, she turned and fled, vanishing through a back door I hadn't noticed before, leaving me alone with the chaos. The entity in the mirror hissed, a sound like escaping gas and tearing silk, before dissolving back into the rippling, distorted reflections. The whispers faded. The unnatural cold lingered, but lessened its grip. The immediate direct assault was over, but the bar felt irrevocably violated, buzzing with a residual hateful energy. Suddenly, the main door burst open. Elias Thorne stood there, face ashen, eyes wide with alarm, clearly drawn by the shattering glass and Sarah's panicked flight. He took in the scene. The shattered bottle, the lingering foul smell, my trembling state, and a look of profound, weary despair settled over him, deeper than any I'd seen before. "She stirred them up again, didn't she?" "Didn't she?" he murmured, stepping inside and locking the door carefully behind him. "Or was it you this time, asking questions?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Doesn't matter. Once they're riled, it takes time for the pattern to settle." He surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on the mirror. "This place, it feeds on routine, Clara. On expectation. On emotion, yes. But predictable emotion. The rules, they're just attempts. Patches on a leaking dam." He sank onto a stool, running a hand over his face. "My family. We didn't build this place, but we inherited its attachments. Been trying to manage it, contain it, for 3 generations. Trying to keep the cycle from spilling out. Banishing?" He gave a short, harsh laugh. "No, you don't banish something that is the place. You just negotiate. You become the caretaker." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrible understanding. "It remembers who serves it, Clara. Remembers the faces behind the bar. Remembers who tries to change things." As the weight of his words crushed down on me, a soft cough came from the end of the bar. Mr. Abernathy. He had been there through it all. Silent, watchful, seemingly untouched by the chaos. He rose slowly and walked towards me, his movements precise despite his age. His eyes, usually just observant, now held an immense, ancient sadness. He stopped before me and pressed something small, cool, and metallic into my trembling hand. It was a tarnished silver locket, heart-shaped, intricately engraved, though the details were worn smooth with time. "This belonged to Emmeline," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The singer. The one who started the fight that night. He took it from her just before." His voice trailed off, unable or unwilling to complete the sentence. He felt entitled. It was the catalyst. He looked towards the silent jukebox in the corner. Put it back, Clara. Put it where she sang. Near the music. Maybe. Maybe restoring that small piece of the pattern will quiet things. Not fix them. Nothing can fix this place, but quiet them. He offered no promise of freedom. Only the faintest possibility of a less violent haunting. I stared down at the locket in my palm. Running felt impossible now. Suicidal even. Based on Sarah's terrified warning, Elias's grim confirmation. The entity remembered. It didn't matter where I went. Stay here? Endure nights like this until I broke or became another echo? Or try this one desperate act? Restore a piece of a pattern I didn't understand. It wasn't a choice for freedom. It felt like choosing the shape of my prison cell. Containment. That was the only path left that wasn't flight into inevitable haunting or succumbing entirely within these walls. Clutching Emmeline's locket, its cool metal a small solid anchor in the sea of fear, I walked towards the ancient jukebox. It stood silent in its shadowed corner, a relic of happier times, superficially masking the tragedy it had presided over. Elias watched me, his expression unreadable. Mr. Abernathy had retreated to his stool, nursing his drink. His part played. Where she sang, Abernathy had said. I ran my fingers along the side of the jukebox, searching for anything unusual. Near the bottom, almost hidden beneath layers of dust and grime, I found it. A small, loose panel, barely noticeable. Perhaps where illicit tips were stashed back in the speakeasy days. Pulling it gently, it came away, revealing a small, dark cavity within the machine's workings. It smelled faintly of dust and something vaguely floral, like long-dead perfume. With trembling fingers, I placed the tarnished silver locket inside the hollow space. As the locket settled onto the dusty wood within, a profound sigh seemed to move through the entire bar. It wasn't wind. It was deeper, more fundamental, as if the building itself was exhaling a breath held for nearly a century. The unnatural chill in the air didn't vanish completely, but it softened. The sharp edges receded. The lingering, faint smell of copper faded, leaving only the familiar, heavy sense of old wood, spilled whiskey, and lingering cigar smoke. The oppressive presence, the feeling of active, malevolent intelligence didn't disappear, but it settled, retreated. It felt less like a predator stalking its cage, more like ghosts falling back into a restless, dreaming sleep, bound once more to their sorrowful routines. The pattern, however flawed, had been momentarily restored. Elias Thorne watched the change, his weary face holding a complex mixture of relief and profound pity directed at me. You've, stabilized it, he murmured, his voice raspy with exhaustion. For now, but the balance is fragile. It needs watching, managing. Always. He slowly took a set of keys from his pocket, heavy, old-fashioned brass keys, and placed them deliberately on the polished bar top in front of me. I'm too old for this watch, Clara. This burden. He didn't say goodbye. He simply turned, walked to the door, unlocked it, and stepped out into the Savannah dawn, leaving the keys, the bar, and its spectral patrons behind, leaving them to me. Mr. Abernathy raised his glass slightly in a silent, sorrowful salute, then finished his drink and departed, leaving me utterly alone in the quieted, yet still deeply haunted, bar. Years passed like slow drips from a faulty tap. Years passed like slow drips from a faulty tap. I am still behind the bar at the Morning Dove. The wood is darker, the mirror more spotted, but fundamentally unchanged. I move with a weariness that mirrors Elias Thorne's now, an understanding etched deep in the lines around my eyes. The spectral patrons still come. The man wanting the usual appears some nights, his face always shadowed now. And I pour his whiskey without a word, my hand steady. Groups still sometimes offer their boisterous toast to the living, and I turn away, polishing the counter with practiced indifference. feeling the momentary chill they bring. The jukebox remains silent, mostly playing its mournful blues, but the potential energy within it, the memory of 1924, is a palpable thing I always feel. Mr. Abernathy still occupies his corner stool most nights, a constant, silent witness. We rarely speak beyond his order, but there's a heavy shared understanding between us, the keeper and the observer of this timeless prison. Till night, as I wipe down the bar at the end of another long shift, locking the heavy door, the routine actions are automatic. I catch my reflection in the vast, age-spotted mirror. My face is tired, resigned, older than my years. Behind my reflection, faint as smoke, almost translucent in the dim light filtering from the street, figures raise their glasses in a silent, eternal toast. A woman in a beaded dress smiles sadly near the jukebox. The man who likes whiskey nods slowly from his usual stool. I don't flinch. I don't look away anymore. They are my patrons now. This is my shift, my responsibility, my cage. Closing time never truly comes at the morning dove. The glass never moved on its own until it did. The jukebox never played that song until it did. And now I know the rules weren't just for safety. They were a contract, a way to keep something hungry barely on the other side of memory. I am still tending bar, still watching the lights, still listening for that one wrong song. If you made it to the end, leave a comment. Tell me which rule unsettled you the most, and subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules. Because next week, we'll show you another place where the dead don't rest, and the drinks are never really for you. There are rules in life. Some are meant to guide us. Others are written in blood, whispered by survivors, and ignored by the dead. Welcome to Night Creepypasta Rules. Each week, we collect the most terrifying rule-based horror stories on the internet. Not just tales, but warnings. From haunted apartments with forbidden floors, to knocks at 3 a.m. that should never be answered. United's compilation is more than just fiction. It's a guidebook for those who know the dark watches back. Watch until the end. One of these stories hides a twist that changes everything. If a rule messed with your head, leave a comment. And if you want to stay ahead of the nightmare, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules. The next rule could save your life. Brooklyn rent could bleed you dry. Finding the Ainsworth Arms online felt like a lifeline tossed into the churning waters of my post-setback existence. Even with the grainy photos showing peeling paint and what looked suspiciously like water stains, the price was almost too good to be true for this part of Bed-Stuy. A fresh start, I told myself, packing the few boxes that contained the remnants of my old life. Then the superintendent, Mr. Henderson, handed me the keys, along with 3 building quirks. His term, not mine, that I had to memorize. That's when the lifeline started feeling considerably more like an anchor chain. The humid August air hung thick and still as I wrestled the last box through the Ainsworth Arms heavy, wrought iron and glass front door. Inside, the lobby offered little relief. The air was cool, yes, but with a stale, recirculated quality, thick with the smells of dust. Industrial strength cleaner failing to mask decades of ingrained grime. And something else underneath. A faint, persistent odor like old wet plaster. Worn mosaic tiles, cracked and uneven, stretched across the floor. A single, flickering fluorescent tube overhead cast a weak, buzzing greenish light that made the already drab cabbage rose wallpaper look actively unwell. The sounds of the bustling Brooklyn street. Car horns, distant sirens, muffled music from passing vehicles seemed strangely muted here, replaced by the building's own internal groans and sighs. A figure emerged from a doorway, tucked beside the ancient, rattling elevator cage. Mr. Henderson. He was a short, stout man in faded work overalls, with a perpetually weary expression etched onto his face and eyes that seemed to have seen too much leaky plumbing, and perhaps other things besides. He grunted a greeting, wiping greasy hands on a rag. Before handing me the keys, he performed a small, odd ritual I hadn't noticed during my brief viewing. He stopped by a specific section of the wall near the mailboxes, tapped it 3 times sharply with his knuckles, listened intently for a moment with his head cocked, then seemed to satisfy himself with a non-committal grunt before finally turning back to me. "All right, apartment 7B, he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. He sorted through a jangling ring of keys. "Got your paperwork. Rent's due the 1st. Late fee after the 5th. Don't buzz anyone in you don't know. Standard stuff." As he was talking, the door directly opposite my new apartment creaked open. A woman peered out. Her bright, slightly mismatched clothing, a stark contrast to the hallway's gloom. She had large, curious eyes and a cascade of dark, unruly hair. "Oh, new neighbor," she exclaimed, her smile wide, perhaps a little too bright. "Welcome, I'm Iris Savina. It's an interesting building," she offered, a knowing glint in her eyes. "Got character. I collect vintage postcards, actually. Got some amazing ones of old Brooklyn if you ever want to see 'em. Or, need sugar or whatever." Her friendliness felt genuine, yet somehow intense, slightly overwhelming in the dim corridor. Just then, further down the hall, another door opened, and a young man, probably early 20s, struggled with the overflowing recycling bin. He looked tired, wearing headphones around his neck, and gave me an awkward half wave. "Hey, you moving into 7B? Cool." He hefted the bin. "Name's Sam. Word of advice? Avoid the elevator if you can help it. Thing's got a mind of its own. Swear it stops between floors sometimes just to mess with you." He attempted a casual laugh, but it sounded strained, his eyes darting nervously towards the rattling elevator cage at the end of the hall, before he hurried towards the stairwell. Mr. Henderson waited for Sam to disappear before turning back to me, his expression becoming serious again. He finally isolated 2 keys on the ring, 1 brass, 1 silver. "Right then, Arthur," he said, "using my name for the first time. Using my name for the first time." He handed me the keys, his callous fingers brushing mine briefly. "Before I leave you to it, the quirks I mentioned, not suggestions, not building gossip, rules. You follow them. Helps keep things settled." He lowered his voice, though the hallway was empty except for us, and the building's own unsettling symphony of creaks and groans. "Rule 1, the elevator." His gaze flickered towards the rattling cage. "Sometimes it stops on 13. The indicator light will say 13. There is no button for 13. If it opens there, doesn't matter if you're going up or down. Doesn't matter if you live on the 7th floor like you do. Don't get in. Let the doors close. Wait for the next one or take the stairs. Just don't step onto the 13th floor." My mouth felt dry. There isn't a 13th floor in most buildings. Henderson just gave me a flat look. "Rule 1 isn't debate architecture. It's don't get in. Clear?" I nodded mutely. "Rule 2, he continued, his gaze drifting up to the flickering fluorescent light fixture directly above us. "The hallway lights, mostly they just hum and flicker like any old wiring. But sometimes they flicker in a pattern, like dots and dashes, rhythmic." His eyes met mine, sharp and serious. "If you see that, if you think you recognize it as some kind of code, ignore it. Don't try to figure it out. Don't write it down. Don't translate it. Look away. Get into your apartment. It's just faulty wiring playing tricks." The way he said it made it clear he didn't believe that himself. "And rule 3. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping further. "You're a neighbor." He nodded towards Iris's door. "Apartment 7. Nice girl, Iris. Keeps to herself mostly. But sometimes, late at night, you might hear a knock on your door. 3 distinct knocks, exactly 3. And if you check the time," he tapped his watch significantly, It'll be precisely 3:03 in the morning. If that happens, Arthur, you don't answer it. You don't even rustle the sheets too loudly. You pretend you are dead asleep, even if your heart is trying to hammer its way out of your chest. You lie still until you're sure whatever it was is gone. Pretend you're asleep. He straightened up, the intensity fading back into weary resignation. That's it. Just those three. Follow 'em. Don't go looking for trouble. Pay your rent on time, and you'll be all right here. He gave a curt nod, turned, and shuffled towards the stairwell exit, his footsteps echoing heavily in the quiet corridor. As his footsteps faded, the single fluorescent tube directly outside my new apartment door, the one he'd glanced at while explaining Rule 2, flickered violently for a second. On, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, casting my elongated shadow in jerky, dancing movements against the opposite wall, before settling back into its sickly buzzing equilibrium. I felt a cold draft curl around my ankles, though there was no discernible source. Welcome to the Ainsworth Arms. Settling into the Ainsworth Arms felt less like nesting, and more like cautiously mapping enemy territory. The apartment itself was decent enough, once I'd scrubbed away layers of previous tenants' grime. But the building had teeth. I learned quickly to ignore the scuttling sounds within the walls, the groaning symphony of the ancient plumbing, the persistent feeling of being observed even when I was certain I was alone. The city throbbed outside, a constant, vibrant pulse. But inside these walls, the silence often felt louder, heavier. It was nearly 2 a.m. a few nights later, after a long shift waiting tables, that I had my first real encounter with Rule 1. Exhausted, carrying a heavy bag of groceries I'd stupidly forgotten earlier, I pressed the call button for the ancient, rattling elevator. It took an age to arrive, groaning and shuddering its way down from the upper floors. Finally, the inner cage door wheezed open, followed by the outer doors. The indicator light above wasn't lit for the lobby, nor my floor, the 7th. It glowed a sickly yellow, displaying a stark, impossible number. 13. I froze. The inside of the elevator car looked wrong. Darker than it should be, the single light bulb flickering weakly, casting long, distorted shadows. It smelled faintly metallic, like old blood or rust, overriding the usual scent of dust and oil. There was an oppressive silence emanating from it, absorbing the ambient sounds of the lobby. Rule 1. Don't step in. My grocery bag suddenly felt 10 times heavier. My apartment was 7 floors up, but the memory of Mr. Henderson's grim face, the absolute certainty in his voice, rooted me to the spot. With trembling fingers, I jabbed the door close button on the wall panel instead. The doors slid shut with agonizing slowness. The number 13, glowing malevolently, until the very last second. The car began its groaning ascent. I turned towards the stairwell, the bag digging into my shoulder. The stairs were worse, steep, narrow, smelling faintly of urine and desperation. Each landing felt identical, disorienting. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the echo of my footsteps on the concrete as I passed the empty space between the 12th and 14th floor landings, where the 13th floor logically should have been. I heard it, a distinct, dry scraping sound, like fingernails dragging slowly across stone, coming from behind the solid brick wall to my left. I didn't stop. I practically ran the rest of the way up to the 7th floor, fumbling with my keys, heart hammering. The next morning, I ran into Sam in the hallway, struggling with his overflowing recycling bin again. "Hey, Arthur," he greeted, looking tired. "Man, you look rough. Long night." "Tell me about it," I muttered. Had to take the stairs, the elevator. It stopped on 13. Sam's attempt at a casual laugh was strained. "Freaks me out. Always feels like it's stopping somewhere it shouldn't." He didn't meet my eyes. Later, I called Jessica, needing a dose of normalcy. I recounted the elevator incident, trying to make it sound like a weird building quirk. Her reaction was immediate. "Arthur, that's not a quirk. That's seriously creepy." 13. "Are you sure? You need to report that to Henderson. Or better yet, start looking for a new place. That whole building sounds like a death trap." Her genuine concern, cutting through the city noise on the other end of the line, was both comforting and deeply unsettling. Maybe she was right, but the thought of starting the apartment hunt all over again, the sheer expense, I pushed it down. It was just an old building, I told myself. Faulty wiring, weird elevator, nothing more. Living in the Ainsworth Arms was an exercise in willful ignorance. I learned the specific creaks of my floorboards, the particular gurgle of the pipes before the hot water arrived, the times my neighbors came and went, but the building's other quirks were harder to ignore, especially late at night. Walking down the long, dimly lit 7th floor corridor one evening after work, the overhead fluorescent lights began to flicker more erratically than usual. Annoying, but normal for this place. Then, the flickering changed. It stopped being random. It settled into a distinct, repeating rhythm. Short flash, long flash, short flash. Then pause. Then again. Dots and dashes. My breath caught. Rule 2. Don't translate it. But it was difficult. The rhythmic pulsing light felt strangely deliberate, almost hypnotic. It seemed to pulse directly into my brain, carrying an intense undercurrent of desperation, of pleading. What was it saying? Was it a warning? A cry for help? The urge to pull out my phone to quickly look up a Morse code chart was almost overwhelming. I forced myself to look down at my feet, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other, walking faster towards my apartment door. The light pulsed insistently against my peripheral vision. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking, finally shoving the door open and stumbling inside, slamming it shut behind me. Silence, or so I thought. Then I heard it again. Faint but unmistakable. The same rhythmic clicking sound, seemingly echoing from within the walls of my own apartment, near the pipes, perhaps. It lasted only a minute, then faded into the building's usual groans. Had I imagined it? The next day, I saw Mr. Henderson kneeling in the hallway, toolbox open beside him, fiddling with the base of the light fixture outside my door. "Having trouble with the lights, Mr. Henderson?" I asked casually, keeping my tone light. He grunted without looking up, tightening something with a wrench. "Old building, Arthur. Old wires. Always something." He refused to meet my gaze, his focus entirely on his task, his movements perhaps a little too forceful. Best not to pay too much mind to flickering lights. Play tricks on your eyes. As I turned to leave him to it, I noticed Iris' door, Savina, was cracked open slightly. I caught a glimpse of her eye, watching us, before the door clicked softly shut. An unsettling feeling prickled the back of my neck. That night, sleep offered little escape. I kept seeing the pulsing light behind my eyelids, hearing the phantom clicks. The rules weren't just passive warnings anymore. They felt like active defenses against specific, persistent intrusions. This building wasn't just haunted. It felt like something was desperately trying to communicate, and I was explicitly forbidden from listening. Chapter 4. Knocked 3 times. The digital clock on my phone glowed. 3:02 a.m. I'd been drifting in that shallow, uneasy state between sleep and wakefulness. The building's groans and the distant city sirens weaving into strange dreams. Then, precisely as the display flipped to 3:03 a.m., it came. Knock, pause, knock, pause, knock. 3 distinct, slow, deliberate knocks on my apartment door. Not tentative, not urgent. Heavy, solid, resonant, like someone using their full knuckle on the old wood. My heart leaped into my throat, pounding against my ribs, Rule 3. Pretend you're asleep. I lay frozen in bed, barely breathing. Every nerve screamed at me to jump up, to look through the peephole, to shout out who would be knocking at this hour. But Henderson's warning echoed louder. Pretend you're asleep. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to slow my racing pulse, forcing my body to remain utterly still beneath the thin blanket. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the frantic drumming in my ears. I could feel the presence on the other side of the door, an intense, focused waiting. It knew I was awake. It had to know. Minutes crawled by like injured snails. My muscles ached from the forced stillness, just as I thought I couldn't bear the tension a second longer. The intense feeling of being watched began to recede. Slowly, reluctantly, silence reclaimed the hallway outside. But then, straining my ears in the absolute quiet, I heard it, not footsteps walking away down the hall. Instead, a faint scrape, almost inaudible, followed by the soft, distinct click of a door latch turning and closing, seemingly coming from directly across the hall, from Iris' apartment. Savina. My blood ran cold. Had the knocker gone to her door, or had she been involved somehow? The possibilities warred in my mind, leaving me more unnerved than before. The feeling of being watched was gone, but replaced by a chilling sense of calculated strangeness. The next morning, exhausted and on edge, I nearly jumped out of my skin when I opened my door to find Iris standing there, holding a small potted plant. She smiled brightly, though she looked tired, faint shadows under her eyes. "Morning, Arthur." "Housewarming gift," she offered, holding out the plant. "Sorry it's a bit late. Hey, did you sleep okay last night? Things get noisy in this old building sometimes. Hope I didn't wake you or anything around 3-ish. Her casual tone, the seemingly innocent question, felt expertly crafted, deeply unsettling. No, I slept fine. I lied, forcing a smile, taking the plant. "Thanks, Iris." Later, I tried cautiously asking Sam if he ever heard strange noises late at night, maybe knocking. He immediately went pale, shook his head vigorously, mumbled something about always sleeping with noise-canceling headphones, and made a hasty retreat back into his apartment. My sense of isolation deepened. Whatever was happening here, I was dealing with it alone, surrounded by neighbors who were either oblivious, terrified into silence, or perhaps, like Iris, knew far more than they were letting on. Weeks bled into each other, marked not by days but by the cycle of dread, the elevator doors opening onto impossible darkness, the rhythmic pulse of light in the corridor, the 3 heavy knocks puncturing the dead of night. Routine settled in, but it was the routine of a prisoner learning the guard's patrol, not the comfort of home. Passivity felt like slow suffocation. The patterns gnawed at me, the feeling of being watched, tested, the specific nature of the rules suggesting specific threats. That Morse code, it felt too deliberate, too insistent to be random electrical noise. Was it a warning I was forbidden to heed? A cry for help I was forced to ignore? The not knowing became its own kind of torture. One particularly oppressive night, sleep utterly refusing to come, I found myself staring at the hallway, ceiling through my peephole, waiting. The usual erratic flickering commenced, then, like clockwork, settled into that distinct repeating rhythm. ... Pause. ... Pause. The familiar sequence. Screw Rule 2, screw Henderson's warnings, screw living like a cornered rat. Heart pounding. I held my phone up to the peephole, finger hovering over the record button. The light pulsed, hypnotic, filling the tiny lens. I recorded several cycles of the repeating pattern, the light seeming to burn hotter, brighter, almost aware of my attention, retreating quickly back into the relative, false, safety of my apartment. I locked the door, leaning against it, breathing heavily, with trembling hands. I played back the recording, pausing, cross-referencing with a Morse code chart I'd pulled up online. The first part was easy, terrifyingly familiar. The second part took longer, my fingers clumsy on the screen. The third part repeated with frantic insistence. Help! SOS! 13! Help! The instant the meaning solidified in my brain, the air in my apartment turned instantly, bitingly cold. The overhead light fixture exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by the glow of my phone screen and the ambient city light filtering through the window. But the darkness wasn't empty. The light from my phone began flickering uncontrollably, mimicking the desperate Morse code. Help! 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 Pulp! Pulsing frantically against the walls. And worse, my mind flooded, not with my own thoughts, but with an overwhelming wave of pure, ice-cold despair. It was the feeling of being utterly alone, trapped in suffocating darkness for an eternity, screaming without a voice. Forgotten images flashed behind my eyes. Rough stone walls slick with dampness, the feeling of immense pressure, the taste of dust and hopelessness. It wasn't my fear. It was the raw, undiluted agony of the entity whose signal I had just intercepted and understood. It knew I'd listened. It was reaching for me. Gasping, choking on the psychic residue, I scrambled towards the door. I didn't know what I was doing. Fleeing? Seeking help? Accusing? I needed to face someone. I threw the door open and practically lunged across the narrow hallway, hammering on Iris' door, Savina. She opened it a crack, her eyes wide with sleep, or perhaps fear, saying my state, the wild look in my eyes, the way I was trembling. Her own fear became palpable. Arthur? What is it? What's wrong? The lights, I gasped, pointing back towards my now dark apartment. The phone still flickering help in my hand. The Morse code. It says OS 13 help. And the knocking. 3 a.m. What did you do after the knocking stopped the other night? I heard your door. The blood drained from her face. Her manufactured friendliness vanished, replaced by stark terror. No. Oh God, no. You translated it? She whispered, grabbing my arm, trying to pull me away from my open door. You shouldn't have done that. You fool. What did you do, Iris? I demanded, shaking off her hand. Tears welled in her eyes. The man who lived in my apartment before me. He hung himself. She sobbed, words tumbling out in a frantic rush. Couldn't take the noises, the feeling of being trapped. They say his echo is the one that knocks, trying to get back in, or get someone else. She shuddered violently. After it knocks, after the silence, I leave this outside my door for a bit. She fumbled in her pocket and produced a small, smooth piece of black tourmaline rock. An old woman in the building told me. Set it. It absorbs the lingering negativity, redirects it. It has to go somewhere, right? I didn't want it settling back on my door. I push it away. Her terrified, selfish confession hung in the air between us, more chilling than any ghostly manifestation. She wasn't evil, just desperately trying to survive by diverting the spectral sewage flow towards me. And her fear, my violation of the rule, the raw anguish I had tapped into, it ripped through the building's fragile equilibrium. The hallway lights, which had momentarily returned to normal, exploded into a frantic, blinding strobe, flashing SOS Help 13 relentlessly, searing the pattern onto my retinas. The elevator cage down the hall began to rattle violently in its shaft, the floor indicator flickering erratically between all numbers, but seeming to linger horribly on 13. Then, From my apartment door behind me, the knocking started again. Not the slow, deliberate 3 knocks. This was a frantic, deafening hammering, like something desperate and enraged trying to break the door down. Knock, 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 knock. The psychic wave of despair crashed over me again, stronger this time, bringing me to my knees in the hallway. Iris screamed, fumbling with her black rock, trying to hold it towards my door like a shield. "Make it stop! Appease it!" she shrieked. I was trapped. The agonizing despair clawed at my sanity from within. The relentless Morse code lights burned my eyes. The furious pounding threatened to splinter the door behind me, and Iris, lost in her own terror, seemed more likely to shove me towards the danger than help me escape it. The Ainsworth arms had finally dropped all pretense. The game was over. The hunt had begun. The chaos reached a fever pitch. The hallway lights strobed so as helped 13 directly into my overloaded brain. The frantic hammering on my door vibrated through the floor, and the psychic despair threatened to drown me. Iris shrieked again, holding her black rock out like a useless talisman, her eyes darting between me and my vibrating door. Suddenly, a bellowed roar echoed from the stairwell. "Enough! Be silent!" Mr. Henderson appeared, moving with surprising speed for his age. He wasn't empty-handed. In his grip was a heavy, old-fashioned lineman's wrench, its iron surface etched with strange symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the strobing light. He raised it, not threateningly, but like warding off something unseen. The moment he stepped into the hallway, the frantic energy seemed to recoil. The hammering on my door lessened to angry thuds. The psychic pressure eased slightly, enough for me to gasp a breath. The lights still flickered, but less violently. Iris, seeing her chance, didn't hesitate. With a final, terrified glance at me and Henderson, she scrambled away, disappearing down the stairwell, her footsteps echoing frantically. Henderson watched her go, then turned his grim gaze to me, kneeling beside me amidst the psychic residue. "Get up, Arthur," he rasped, his voice strained. He helped me stumble back into my apartment, the relative quiet inside feeling fragile, temporary. He shut the door, leaning heavily against it. The angry thuds outside faded. "You did it, didn't you?" Henderson sighed, his voice heavy with resignation, not accusation. "You listened. Translated it." He sank onto my dusty armchair, looking utterly defeated. Rule 2. It wasn't just about not understanding. It was about not engaging, not opening the line. He finally told me then, the words tumbling out in weary fragments. The building wasn't just haunted. It was built on a nexus of failed ambition and tragedy. The architect, obsessed with contacting spirits or other dimensions, had incorporated experimental wiring, strange resonant chambers, even the non-existent 13th floor, into the design. His prize invention was a communication device meant to bridge worlds, powered by the building's own chaotic energy. He died during a final, disastrous experiment, trapping himself and others sensitive to the frequencies as tormented echoes. Sensitive to the frequencies as tormented echoes. The Morse code signal, SOS 13, help, was the architect himself, or what remained of him, eternally broadcasting his final moments of terror and entrapment from his nexuses on the phantom floor. My grandfather was the super then, Henderson sighed, rubbing his temples. He found the notes, the warnings. This wrench, he patted the tool resting on his lap. It disrupts the local energy field somehow, dampens things temporarily. Dampens things temporarily. A family curse, keeping the lid on this place. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a grim certainty. But you didn't just hear the signal, Arthur. By translating it, you answered. You created a resonance, a direct link. It knows you now. It's imprinted on you. Leaving the building won't be enough to break that connection. It'll follow. My blood ran cold. forever haunted by that crushing despair. Isn't there anything? Henderson hesitated, looking older than ever. There's one thing, mentioned in the old man's journals. A reset. Dangerous as hell. Never tried. He explained frantically. The architect's original device had a physical relay point. Brittle wires hidden somewhere near the main electrical risers, possibly close to the elevator shaft on this floor. The journal described a complex counter-sequence, a specific burst of modulated energy that might disrupt the primary signal, sever the architect's psychic broadcast. But Henderson warned, his voice grave, it could overload everything, could draw all the attention here, could scramble your own mind in the feedback, or trap you with him somehow. It's a one-way street if it goes wrong. The options laid bare. Flee, and be eternally tormented by the psychic echo. Resign myself to this haunted half-life within the Ainsworth arms, or attempt the reset. A dangerous, desperate gamble against a ghost in the machine. But the thought of that despair clinging to me forever. I knew what I had to do. Show me the journal, I said, my voice hoarse. Show me the sequence. Following the faded diagrams and cryptic instructions in Henderson's grandfather's journal felt like defusing a bomb built by a madman. Henderson, muttering prayers or curses under his breath, guided me to a small, locked service panel in the hallway wall near the elevator shaft, hidden behind a loose piece of baseboard. Inside, amidst a tangle of modern wiring, were older, brittle-looking, fabric-coated wires. The architect's original relay, Henderson guessed. He produced the counter-signal device from his toolbox. A clunky, antique contraption of brass dials, vacuum tubes, and copper coils that looked like something from a Frankenstein movie. He attached leads to the old wires with trembling hands, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the hallway's chill. The sequence he rasped, pointing to a specific series of pulses noted in the journal. Get it exactly right, and pray. The hallway lights began to flicker again as we worked, starting the slow SOS rhythm, as if sensing our interference. The air grew heavy, charged with static, and that familiar, soul-crushing despair washing over me in waves. I took a deep breath, focused past the fear, and flipped the switch on the generator, then carefully inputted the counter-sequence Henderson indicated. A complex series of rapid pulses, perhaps spelling silence or rest in a forgotten code dialect. The moment the sequence completed, the backlash hit. A silent, psychic scream tore through my mind. Pure agony and frustrated rage. The lights in the entire hallway, possibly the whole building, flashed blindingly white, bathing everything in an X-ray glare for a split second, then plunged into utter darkness. The elevator cage gave a final violent shudder and fell completely silent. I felt a distinct snap in my mind, a feeling of tearing, of a connection being forcibly severed, followed by a wave of dizziness and nausea. Then, quiet, not the heavy, watchful silence of before, but a true quiet. Psychic pressure vanished. The feeling of despair lifted completely, leaving behind only the echo of its awfulness. The connection felt broken, cauterized. Did it work? I gasped, leaning against the wall, spots dancing before my eyes in the dark. The signal's gone, Henderson whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. He shone a flashlight around. The main power's out now, too. You need to go, Arthur. Now, before anything else wakes up or notices the silence. He didn't have to tell me twice. I stumbled back to my apartment, grabbed my pre-packed duffel bag, the one I'd kept ready just in case, and left the keys on the counter. I didn't look back at the apartment, at the hallway, at the silent elevator. Henderson let me out the front door into the pre-dawn gray of Brooklyn. I didn't thank him. Words felt inadequate, meaningless. I just walked away, melting into the anonymity of the awakening city. putting as much distance as possible between myself and the Ainsworth Arms. I took a bus out of the city that same day. Months later, a quiet town upstate, a boring job, a small clean apartment that didn't groan or whisper in the night. I was functional. The crushing despair tied to the Morse code was gone. Truly gone. The silence in my head was real. Mostly. Sometimes, I'd find myself tapping my fingers unconsciously on the coffee table while reading. ... I'd catch myself doing it and stop, a cold sweat breaking out. I started noticing flickering lights everywhere. Street lights cycling. Neon signs buzzing. Sunlight striping through window blinds. And my brain would automatically try to decipher them. It would impose patterns, look for rhythms, search for messages that weren't there. SOS. Help. 13. Random flickers became potential signals. The background noise of the world, a code only I was attuned to. One rainy afternoon, I sat by the window watching the drops chase each other down the glass. Without thinking, my finger traced patterns in the condensation. Dots. Dashes. I stared at the familiar sequence, my own creation on the glass. The distant blink of a radio tower across the valley caught my eye. Blink, 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 blink. My mind instantly translated. Oh. I had silenced the ghost signal, severed its direct line into my head, but the pattern, the rhythm, the desperate language of dots and dashes, that had imprinted itself onto me. The lease at the Ainsworth Arms was terminated, yes, but a new internal lease had begun. Paid in paranoia and phantom messages. The signal was silent, but now, I was the receiver, forever scanning the static. You followed the rules. You watched until the end, but that doesn't mean you're safe. The elevator may stop at 13 again. The hallway lights may start blinking in code, and something might knock. This week's rules were only the beginning. Next week, something darker is waiting. Let me know in the comments which story stayed with you, and which rule you would have broken. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because in this game, the moment you forget the rules, you become the next story. Some stories are whispered in confessionals, some are buried beneath Vatican archives, and some bleed their way to the surface. Welcome to Night Creepypasta Rules, where every rule is carved from terror, and every tale a warning. Tonight's case isn't fiction. It's a field report, a new Vatican exorcist, a rural farmhouse in Pennsylvania, and 3 rules whispered by a man who's seen what the textbooks dare not print. Rules that, if broken, don't just end lives, they unmake them. You think you've heard every possession story? You haven't. Stay until the end. One of these rules doesn't just protect the soul. It reveals a betrayal deeper than the devil himself. If this story chills your bones, leave a comment. And if you believe that some prayers aren't meant to be spoken aloud, subscribe. New horrors drop every week, and the next one might just save you. Rome taught me Latin until it saturated my dreams. It taught me theology, the intricate laws of canon, the precise weight and terrifying power contained within the worn leather covers of the Ritual Romanum. My ordination felt less like an elevation and more like being handed a weapon I was only beginning to understand, sent into a war I could barely comprehend. They called me Father Michael now. My first assignment, the Carter farmhouse, rural Pennsylvania. And Father Damon, my assigned mentor for this initial plunge into the abyss, had given me 3 specific unofficial rules. Via a crackling phone line from diocesan headquarters. Rules, he claimed, his voice heavy with a weariness that transcended mere fatigue. were more critical for surviving this particular darkness than any passage inscribed in Vatican City. The drive itself felt like a descent. Paved roads gave way to gravel, then rutted dirt tracks winding through dense, silent woods. Autumn had begun its slow bleed across the Pennsylvania hills, but the beauty felt distant, irrelevant. The closer I got to the coordinates provided in the sparse dossier, the heavier the air seemed to become, pressing in on the car, the silence outside amplifying the nervous thrum of my own pulse. Finally, the trees opened onto a clearing dominated by the house. The Carter farmhouse stood stark against the gray, overcast sky. It might have been handsome once, a solid, two-story clapboard structure with generous porches, but time and neglect had taken their toll. Paint peeled like sunburned skin. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, and several windows on the upper floor were dark, vacant sockets. An unnatural quiet hung over the property. No birdsong, no distant bark of a dog. Just the low sigh of the wind whistling through the skeletal branches of a nearby oak. The air smelled of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something acrid and faintly metallic, like rusted machinery left too long in the rain. John Carter met me at the door before I could even knock. A tall man, broad-shouldered but stooped now, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, his face etched with a desperate, bewildered grief. His handshake was hard, almost crushing. Father Michael. Thank God, please come in. His wife, Mary, stood just behind him in the dim hallway, smaller, seeming to shrink into the shadows. She clutched her rosary, her knuckles white, her lips moving silently, while John radiated a tense, brittle energy that threatened to shatter. Mary seemed consumed by a quiet, paralyzing terror. Their shared ordeal manifested differently, creating a subtle, tragic dissonance between them. Elias prayed, Mary whispered, her voice thin, before it got bad. A past attempt? A local priest? The dossier hadn't mentioned it. The house inside was clean but worn, sparsely furnished. Religious icons. A crucifix here. A framed print of the Virgin Mary there, dotted the walls, but they felt like talismans losing their power, dusty and ignored rather than revered. The air was cold, unnaturally so for the season. Emily? Our daughter? She's upstairs, John said, his voice cracking. She's not herself, Father. Not for weeks now. He swallowed hard. The doctors, they found nothing. Prescribed pills, useless. I asked the standard preliminary questions, my voice sounding calmer, more professional than I felt. They spoke of changes in Emily, withdrawal, hostility, speaking in languages she couldn't know, unnatural strength, aversion to blessed objects, textbook signs. Yet, hearing them from these devastated parents made the clinical terms feel hollow. I saw glimpses of the real Emily in photos on the mantelpiece. A smiling, vibrant teenager with bright eyes, holding a lacrosse stick in one, beaming beside a horse in another. The contrast with the low, guttural sounds occasionally drifting from upstairs was jarring. My phone buzzed, a scheduled check-in call. "Excuse me," I murmured, stepping onto the porch. Father Michael, Dr. Rossi. The voice on the other end was female, calm, professional, with a faint European accent. Isabella Rossi, the Vatican-assigned psychologist monitoring the case from afar. Just confirming your arrival and initial assessment. Any immediate signs of mundane psychological distress, pre-existing conditions, familial stressors we should prioritize. Her questions were standard, yet probing. Any unusual environmental factors noted? Local folklore pertaining to the property? Prior attempts at unconventional resolution? Her clinical detachment felt both reassuring and oddly cold. I gave her the basics, keeping my deeper unease to myself for now. Just as I disconnected, Another car pulled up the long drive. Father Damon. He emerged, moving with a stiff deliberateness that suggested old injuries or profound fatigue. He was older than I expected, perhaps late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, set in a face deeply lined. He carried a worn, heavy leather satchel that seemed almost an extension of himself. His grip, when he shook my hand, was surprisingly strong, cool to the touch. Father Michael, he acknowledged with a curt nod. Ready to begin the assessment? His voice was quiet, resonant. He surveyed the house, his gaze lingering on the upper windows. A flicker of something unreadable. Recognition? Resignation? In his eyes. As we walked towards the house, he touched the simple wooden cross at his throat. A habitual gesture. "Remember, Father," he murmured. "Some things encountered in this work. They test more than just your faith. They test your sanity, and the rules of engagement aren't always found in the approved texts." Inside, after a brief, grim consultation with the Carters, Father Damon pulled me aside near the bottom of the stairs, leading up to Emily's room. His weary eyes held a sharp, intense focus. "All right, Michael, before we go up, before the formal prayers begin, you need to understand the specific parameters for this entity, based on preliminary reports and intuition." He leaned closer. "These aren't in the ritual. These are field protocols, non-negotiable. Your life and the girl's soul could depend on them." I nodded, holding my own worn copy of the ritual against my chest like a shield. "Rule 1, Damon stated, his voice low and firm. "Once the formal rite of exorcism has begun, once the threshold of that room is ritually secured, I will not leave your side unless physically incapacitated, or until it is finished. If, during the rite, you see me appear at the doorway, or hear my voice offering advice from the hallway after we have both entered, it is not me. Do not acknowledge it. Do not respond to it. It is a mimicry, a test. Ignore it utterly." My blood ran cold. "A mimic? Rule 2. He tapped the ritual I was holding. "This one, it's a mocker, a defiler of words. If, while you are reading the Latin aloud, you see the text itself begin to shift, to blur, the letters rearranging themselves into blasphemy or nonsense, even for an instant, stop reading immediately. Close the book. Continue with memorized prayers only. Do not give it purchase by speaking its corrupted version of the word. A defiler of words." The thought was nauseating. And Rule 3, he met my eyes, his gaze piercing. "Pay attention to the lights. Standard fluctuations happen in old houses. Power surges. But if the lights, lamps, overheads, whatever's on in the room, begin to flicker in perfect synchronicity with your spoken words, dimming and brightening with each syllable you utter, cease speaking immediately. Someone else is listening, not just the primary entity. Something is drawing energy or information from the very sound waves of the prayers. Silence is your shield then. Use gestures, use blessed objects, use memorized prayers whispered only in your heart. But do not feed the listener with spoken words." He straightened up, the intensity receding slightly, replaced by that familiar weariness. "Mimicry, corruption, eavesdropping. Its methods are insidious. Remember the rules, Michael. Above all else." He turned towards the stairs, as I placed my hand on the banister to follow. My fingers brushed against the closed wooden door, leading into what must be Emily's room at the top of the landing. An intense, unnatural cold seeped through the solid wood, biting deep into my fingertips, and faintly, muffled but distinct from within the room, I heard a sound like dozens of dry, brittle pages turning rapidly, one after another, though Emily Carter was supposedly alone, and likely in no condition to read. Preparation was a ritual in itself. Father Damon moved with practiced efficiency, laying out the supplies from his worn leather satchel. vials of holy water gleaming dully in the dim light, coarse grains of blessed salt, a heavy silver crucifix, his personal stole embroidered with subtle protective symbols, and of course, the Ritual Romanum, its pages thin and soft from years of use. He began the initial prayers, his resonant Latin filling the cramped upstairs hallway, blessing the threshold of Emily Carter's bedroom door, establishing the boundaries of the sacred space we were about to enter. The air grew heavy, charged with anticipation. We entered together. The room was bleak. Teenage posters half torn from the walls, mingled with childish drawings taped haphazardly. The air was cold, stale, thick with a faint, sickly sweet odor beneath the smell of dust and disuse. Emily lay on the bed, unnaturally still, eyes closed, her breathing shallow. She looked small, fragile, a stark contrast to the faint scratches visible on the wooden headboard above her. I took my position near the foot of the bed, Damon near the head, opening my own copy of the Ritual, its familiar weight a small comfort. I began the opening prayers, the ancient Latin words feeling solid, authoritative on my tongue. Almost immediately, Emily's eyes snapped open. They weren't her eyes. They were filled with flat, ancient malice. Pupils dilated into black pits. A low growl rumbled in her chest, a sound no human throat should make. The temperature in the room plummeted, my breath misting. The fight was joined. Damon responded instantly, sprinkling holy water, his own voice unwavering as he recited the litany of saints. I continued the prayers from the Ritual, focusing intently on the text, the familiar cadence a shield against the rising dread. We worked in tandem, a practiced rhythm, despite this being our first case together. Then, peripherally, I saw movement. The bedroom door, which Damon had firmly closed behind us, creaked open a few inches. Standing there, bathed in the dim hallway light, was Father Damon's silhouette. He looked concerned, leaning in slightly. "Michael." His voice whispered, sounding exactly like my mentor, yet subtly wrong, lacking the usual weariness. Perhaps a different psalm first? Section 3 might provoke less resistance initially. Rule 1. He is not your mentor. My blood ran cold, but my voice didn't falter. I kept my eyes fixed fiercely on the Ritual, refusing to look towards the door, raising my voice slightly as I continued the prescribed prayer, pouring every ounce of faith and focus into the Latin. Without looking, I made a sharp sign of the cross in the direction of the doorway. The sense of intrusion vanished instantly. A moment later, I heard the soft click of the door closing fully. The mimicry was disturbingly accurate. A subtle attempt to sow doubt, to break our unity. The ritual continued for another hour, marked by Emily's increasing, though still contained, agitation, unnatural shifts in posture, whispered curses in languages I barely recognized. When Damon finally called for a brief recess, allowing the Carters a moment with their daughter, while we stepped out, I felt drained, shaken. Downstairs, while sipping cool water in the tense silence of the living room, I mentioned it obliquely to Damon. There was an attempt at distraction from the hallway. Damon paused, his hand automatically going to the wooden cross at his throat. He nodded grimly, his eyes sharp. Good. You recognized it. Passed the first test. It proves for weakness, Michael, always. Seeks to divide, to confuse. Stay vigilant. It will try again. His confirmation, the casual acknowledgement of such terrifying mimicry, only underscored the danger we faced. My phone vibrated later. Dr. Rossi. I stepped outside into the gray afternoon, the air chilling. Father Michael. Any significant developments? Her voice was crisp, clinical. I reported the entity's initial resistance, keeping the details sparse. Resistance parameters, she pressed. Vocalization types? Physical manifestations? Any anomalous temperature fluctuations exceeding standard deviations? Her questions felt less like pastoral concern and more like data collection. Maintain emotional distance, Father, she advised coolly before disconnecting. Objectivity is key. Back inside, while preparing for the next session, my gaze fell upon a small stack of notebooks on Emily's nightstand. Tucked beneath them, almost hidden, was a loose sheet of paper covered in frantic, intricate drawings. They weren't random doodles. They resembled complex geographical maps mixed with distorted mathematical equations and warped snippets of what looked like Latin or Greek. It felt disturbingly intelligent, obsessively detailed, like notes from a mad scholar or the workings of the scribe itself. The second session began with a palpable escalation. As soon as the prayers recommenced, the entity seized control of Emily more forcefully. Her limbs contorted at unnatural angles, her head snapping back, her voice shifting rapidly. One moment a guttural growl, the next a high-pitched mocking giggle, then suddenly speaking in perfect archaic Greek, predicting John Carter's minor upcoming business trouble with chilling accuracy, causing him to pale visibly where he knelt praying just outside the door. The scribe wasn't just present, it was showing off, trying to undermine our resolve through fear and forbidden knowledge. Ignore its theatrics, Michael, Damon murmured, his focus absolute as he sprinkled holy water on Emily's writhing form. Focus on the right. The words are your weapon. I nodded, forcing my attention back to the Ritual Romanum, turning to one of the major prayers of adjuration. The Latin felt heavy, powerful, each syllable a blow against the encroaching darkness. I read clearly, forcefully. Exorcismus te, omnis immunda spiritus, omnis satanica potestas, omnis incursio infernalis adversari. As my thumb rested on the page tracking the text, I saw it. The ink beneath my fingers shifted for a horrifying, sickening instant. The printed letters seemed to liquefy, bleeding outwards, rearranging themselves. The sacred Latin twisted into something else. Pater Noster Malcor, father of lies, master of mockery. Before snapping back to the correct text. Rule 2. Stop reading. A wave of nausea and vertigo hit me. I slammed the heavy book shut with a crack that echoed in the tense room, my breath catching in my throat. The entity in Emily let out a triumphant, screeching laugh, ignoring it. I took a grounding breath and continued the prayer from memory, my voice perhaps a little less steady, relying now solely on the words etched into my mind and soul, not the potentially treacherous ink on the page. The entity seemed momentarily thrown, its physical manifestations lessening slightly as if confused by the change in tactic. During the next brief respite downstairs, I signaled the book incident to Damon discreetly. He nodded grimly. The scribe, he confirmed, his voice low. It attempts to poison the source, twist the very words of deliverance into chains. Trust your memory now, Michael. Trust your faith. The ink is no longer reliable. The Carters were downstairs, huddled together on the worn sofa, looking utterly broken. Mary clutched her rosary, whispering prayers. John stared blankly at the wall. There are old books, Mary said suddenly, her voice barely audible, looking at me with desperate eyes, in the attic. My husband's grandfather, he collected strange texts, always said some books were dangerous, kept them locked away. Could there be a connection? A source? As I prepared to go back upstairs, standing alone for a moment in the cold hallway, I heard them, whispers seeming to come from the air itself, cold and mocking, echoing the memorized Latin prayers I had just recited upstairs back at me, but subtly distorted, twisted, ending in sibilant, hateful laughter. It was listening, learning, adapting, and it was far from finished. The battle settled into a grim rhythm. We pushed back. The entity, The scribe seemed to relish the confrontation now, its power manifesting more overtly. Objects in the room would occasionally slide or rattle, not thrown violently, but moved with a deliberate mocking touch. The sickly sweet odor would intensify, sometimes accompanied by pockets of intense cold that settled on my skin like grave dirt. Emily thrashed, her voice a conduit for streams of blasphemy and chillingly accurate insults directed at both me and Damon, probing for weaknesses in our faith, our pasts. I relied heavily on the ritual memorized passages. Holy water. The blessed crucifix pressed against Emily's forehead during paroxysms. Damon was a rock, his presence steady, his Latin resonant, countering the entity's barbs with calm authority. We were making progress, I felt, chipping away at its hold. Then I made a direct, forceful command, pouring conviction into the Latin. Recede, immundus spiritus, in nomine Patris. As I spoke the first word, recede, the bedside lamp flickered sharply. Immunda, flicker, spiritus, flicker, in, flicker, nomine, flicker, Patris, flicker. Each syllable precisely echoed by a pulse of the light bulb. Not random flickering, perfect synchronization. Rule 3. Someone else is listening. Drawing power from the holy words themselves, I stopped speaking mid-word, cutting off the flow of Latin. Instantly, the flickering ceased. The air grew still, heavy with a different kind of tension. An expectant silence. The entity possessing Emily seemed to pause, confused or perhaps wary of this new development. I quickly made a silent sign of the cross, then gestured subtly to Damon, indicating Rule 3 was in effect. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, a grim understanding passing between us. We shifted tactics immediately. No more spoken commands or lengthy prayers allowed. We relied on silent prayer, gestures of blessing, the physical application of holy water, and the crucifix. The atmosphere changed. The direct, aggressive resistance lessened slightly, replaced by a cold, calculating watchfulness. The entity was still there, perhaps even amused, but the listener was no longer being directly fed. During a brief moment of relative calm, Emily's own eyes fluttered open, momentarily clear, filled with exhaustion and terror. She looked directly at me, her lips barely moving. So loud, she whispered, her voice fragile, raspy. The words, they draw them, they hear. Then her eyes rolled back, and a low growl issued from her throat as the entity reasserted control. Her desperate confirmation sent a fresh wave of dread through me. Later, downstairs during another break, my phone buzzed. Dr. Rossi again. I reported the progress, the shift in tactics due to unexpected interference patterns. Her clinical interest sharpened immediately. Fascinating. Precise one-to-one correlation between vocalization and electrical fluctuation, independent of emotional intensity. Did you manage to document the frequency or waveform? Any corresponding changes in ambient electromagnetic readings? Her questions were purely analytical, devoid of pastoral concern, focusing entirely on the phenomenon itself. It felt wrong, invasive, like I was describing lab results, not a soul in peril. Back upstairs, preparing for the next session, the room felt colder than ever. The main cold spot seemed focused around Emily as expected, but as I moved towards the window to draw the curtains against the fading light, I felt it, a new, distinct patch of intense cold emanating from the far corner of the room, near the dusty, unused rocking chair. It felt different from the entity possessing Emily. Less overtly malevolent, perhaps, but ancient, aware, and utterly focused. The listener hadn't left just because we'd fallen silent. It was still there, waiting, observing. Our shift to silent prayers and blessed objects seemed to merely irritate the scribe, not defeat it. The overt thrashing lessened, replaced by a chilling stillness in Emily's form. But her eyes, now wide open, fixed on me, burning with an ancient calculating coldness, told a different story. The entity was gathering itself, changing tactics. Then it spoke, not with a growl or a shriek, but with chilling, perfect mimicry of Father Damon's weary, resonant voice, though Emily's lips barely moved. Still clinging to those memorized verses, Michael. A commendable effort. But what happens when doubt creeps in, makes the words slip? Like you slipped on your sister's birthday last year, didn't you? Too busy studying the sacred mysteries in Rome. Ice flooded my veins. It wasn't just guessing. It knew. Before I could process the violation, the voice shifted, becoming a sibilant whisper that seemed to slither directly into my mind. Or perhaps we should recall that unfortunate incident in the lower levels of the Lateran Basilica. The doubts you expressed after encountering Auxiliary Bishop Malatesta's private files? Dr. Rossi found your subsequent psychological evaluation most illuminating regarding stress responses. Rossi! The name hit me like a physical blow. Her carefully clinical questions, her probing about specific anxieties, family history, reactions to stimuli. It wasn't procedure. It was data collection. This entity wasn't just psychic. It was potentially being fed information. Was the listener Rossi's observation tool? Was I not just an exorcist, but a test subject in some unsanctioned, horrific experiment? The cold fury that rose in me momentarily eclipsed the fear. Enough! Father Damon's voice cut through the entity's whispers, his face grim as he held the crucifix forward like a shield. You traffic in lies and stolen knowledge, fiend. The entity laughed then, a dry, rustling sound coming from Emily's throat. Knowledge is power, old man, and secrets are the sweetest nourishment. It turned its burning gaze back to me. The listener appreciates intention, little priest, but words give it form. Your silent prayers were merely an appetizer. This had to stop. During a brief lull created by Damon anointing Emily's forehead with chrism oil, causing her to recoil with a hiss, I pulled out my phone. Ignoring Damon's sharp, questioning look, I stepped towards the hallway door, needing distance, needing answers. I dialed Dr. Rossi's number, the one designated for urgent consultation. She answered on the second ring, her voice impossibly calm. Father Michael, is there a development? Development? My voice shook with barely contained rage. It knows things, Doctor. Things from my private psych evaluation. Things you specifically asked about. What in God's name is this? Are we your damn research subjects? There was a fractional pause on the line. Then her tone shifted, shedding the last vestiges of clinical detachment, replaced by a chillingly serene conviction. Subjects? No, Father. Pioneers. The nature of the adversary is evolving. Our methods of understanding, our defenses, must evolve at a pace the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith is unprepared for. Certain influences require direct observation, detailed analysis of their cognitive infiltration, their linguistic manipulation, by feeding them ammunition, by putting souls and priests directly in harm's way. There are acceptable losses in any vital research, Father, she replied coolly. The entity designated the scribe presents a unique opportunity to study textual corruption and psychic resonance firsthand. Your reactions, your resistance, Father Damon's more traditional methods, all invaluable data points. This knowledge could forge new weapons in this war, protect millions eventually. Consider your participation a vital contribution to a necessary, albeit discreet, branch of theological defense. The arrogance, the arrogance, the utter lack of empathy was breathtaking. Cooperate, Father. Document everything meticulously. Your efforts will be recognized by those who matter. As she spoke, I felt a wave of icy malevolence wash over me, seemingly emanating from the phone itself. Simultaneously, a blood-curdling shriek tore through the air from Emily's room behind me. I dropped the phone. Rossi's voice abruptly cut off and spun back towards the bedroom. Chaos. The room was a whirlwind of malevolent energy. Ink-black shadows bled profusely from the corners of the ceiling, dripping onto the floor and coalescing into writhing, shifting shapes that vaguely resembled oversized, distorted Hebrew or Enochian letters. My ritual Romanum, lying open on the floor, where I must have dropped it earlier, was flipping pages with impossible speed. The sacred Latin text visibly boiling on the page, morphing into streams of blasphemous sigils and threats scrolling across. The parchment like a hellish ticker tape. Rule 2, weaponized. Emily was levitating horizontally a foot above the bed, spine arched unnaturally, head thrown back, laughing in that horrifying, multi-layered demonic voice that scraped against sanity. Father Damon was chanting desperately, holding his crucifix aloft. But books, trinkets, even the small bedside table, flew around the room as if caught in a poltergeist hurricane. The lights strobed violently, uncontrollably now, casting the scene in flashes of stark horror. And the cold spot near the window, it wasn't just cold anymore. The air there visibly rippled, distorting the view of the dark woods outside, like looking through flawed, ancient glass. A low hum emanated from that spot, a feeling of immense ancient power focusing, the listener perhaps no longer content to just listen. The scribe, its voice booming through Emily now, fixed its burning gaze on me. You talked to the little researcher, shared secrets, angered the listener. It gestured with Emily's unnaturally contorted hand towards the furiously rewriting ritual on the floor. Forget your memorized prayers, little priest. Read my truth. Read the words as they should be. Accept my scripture. The psychic pressure slammed into me, an almost physical force, urging me towards the blasphemous book, promising power, knowledge, an end to the struggle if I would just read. Father Damon shouted my name, a warning lost in the cacophony, as he struggled to fend off a flying lamp. I was trapped, pinned by the entity's psychic command, drawn towards the corrupted ritual, while the very air in the corner seemed to coalesce into a separate, watching, intensely powerful presence, caught between the scribe's scripture and the listener's attention, with human betrayal paving the way. The psychic assault receded like a physical blow upon impact with something solid. Perhaps my desperate, silent invocation of Saint Michael the Archangel, protector against darkness, or perhaps Father Damon's forceful blessing that seemed to momentarily ground the chaotic energy in the room. The ink-like shadows writhed and retracted back into the corners. The pages of the ritual slapped shut as if by an unseen hand, and the horrible rewriting ceased. Emily crumpled onto the bed, limbs slack, unconscious. The multi-layered demonic voice silenced. The oppressive pressure lessened, leaving behind a ringing silence thick with the smell of ozone, burnt paper, and the cloying sweetness of decay mixed with fear sweat. The immediate, overwhelming attack was over, but the room felt desecrated, shivering with residual malice. Father Damon, breathing heavily, immediately went to Emily's side, checking her pulse, murmuring prayers of protection, anointing her forehead gently with holy oil. I staggered back against the wall, retrieving my phone from where I'd dropped it. The line to Rossi was dead. Looking around the wrecked room, overturned furniture, scattered books, scorch marks on the wallpaper where shadows had lingered too long. The reality of the battle, and the insidious human betrayal that had amplified it, hit me with full force. She's stable, Damon reported grimly, straightening up. The entity is suppressed, pushed back. But not gone, Michael. Not yet. He looked at me, his experienced eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and grim understanding. Rossi, I feared her faction might take an interest in a case like this. The scribe, as some texts call entities obsessed with corrupting knowledge. He sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly looking ancient. They call themselves the Pontifical Institute for Esoteric Defenses unofficially. A dangerous radical fringe. They believe understanding the enemy justifies any method, overlooks collateral damage, especially when the damage isn't to them. He confirmed my worst fears about Rossi's motives. Her likely use of my psych evaluation. Her calculated risks with our souls for her data. Be warned, Michael, he continued, his voice low and serious. Reporting her directly through official channels now. It could be perilous. Her faction has quiet influence, powerful patrons who believe the old ways are insufficient. You become inconvenient. You've seen behind the curtain. Just then, the bedroom door creaked open, revealing John and Mary Carter, faces etched with terror, but drawn by the sudden silence. Seeing Emily unconscious but seemingly peaceful, Mary let out a choked sob of relief, rushing to her side. John looked around the wrecked room, then at us, bewildered. What happened? Amidst the debris near the overturned nightstand, my eyes caught something. The old family Bible Mary had mentioned earlier, knocked from a high shelf during the chaos. It had fallen open. Pages crumpled. I picked it up carefully. It was open to the Gospel of John, the passage about the Word becoming flesh. And there, in the wide margin, penned in faded brown ink, in a script generations old, possibly John Carter's grandfather, were annotations, not just notes, but what looked like a specific counter-prayer, interwoven with symbols I vaguely recognized as local Pennsylvanian folk wards against liars and twisted tongues. Below it, a single sentence, Veritas speculo ligat, truth binds in the mirror. A desperate idea spark. The entity manifested through corrupted words, through mockery. The climax involved the mirror. Could this annotated Bible, this fusion of formal rite and local belief, focused through a mirror, be the key to sealing it? I showed the page to Damon. He studied it intently, his eyes widening slightly. Folk magic mixed with scripture. Unconventional, risky, but truth against the liar. Speculo. In the mirror, it might just work. It feels right for this adversary. Our choice was clear. Forget Rossi and her shadowy faction for now. The immediate duty was to Emily, to the Carters, to finish this. The lingering presence of the listener remained an unnerving unknown, but the primary threat, the scribe, had revealed a potential vulnerability. We prepared for the final ritual, not with the full pomp of the initial exorcism, but with focused intensity guided by the notes in the old family Bible. Following the cryptic instructions, Damon retrieved several small, antique hand mirrors from his satchel, items I hadn't seen him use before, and we placed them strategically around Emily's bed, angling them towards her still form. The annotated Bible lay open on the nightstand, the counter-prayer illuminated by a single blessed candle, its flame burning steadily in the now preternaturally still room. We began the rite, our voices low but firm, reciting the unique blend of Latin prayers for truth and the specific folk incantations from the Bible's margin. The air grew cold again, the familiar pressure building, but differently this time. Less chaotic rage, more focused, cornered resistance. Whispers slithered from the shadows, trying to twist the words on our tongues, trying to rekindle the despair, referencing Rossi's betrayal, my own past doubts. Truth cannot save you. The listener still judges, heretics invoking peasant charms. Emily stirred on the bed, her eyes snapping open, burning with the scribe's cold fire. It tried to speak through her, but the words came out distorted, choked, as if the counter prayers were actively interfering with its ability to corrupt sound. The ink-like shadows gathered again, swirling around the bed, avoiding the candlelight, pressing inwards. The cold spot near the window pulsed, a silent, watchful pressure, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the shadows. We focused on the right, our voices rising in unison, directing the final verses towards the angled mirrors, invoking the power of divine truth to bind the liar to its own reflection, trapping it in a mire to its own reflection, trapping it in a paradox of its own making. Veritas speculo ligat, veritas te judicat, veritas te vincit. Truth binds in the mirror, truth judges you, truth conquers you. As the final word echoed, Emily convulsed violently one last time. A high-pitched, multi-layered shriek tore through the room. A sound of agony, frustration, and finally, dissolution. It felt as if something ancient and malevolent was being forcibly withdrawn, pulled inwards. The surfaces of the small mirrors surrounding the bed clouded over instantly with black frost, then cleared just as quickly, reflecting only the candlelit room. A profound silence fell. The unnatural cold vanished, replaced by the room's normal stale air. The oppressive weight lifted completely, leaving behind only a lingering sense of violation, like the memory of a fever broken. Emily's breathing evened out, deep and regular. Color slowly returned to her face. Her eyes, when they fluttered open moments later, were simply her own, confused, exhausted, but hers. She was free. Exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. Damon slumped against the wall, crossing himself, murmuring a prayer of thanks. Later, after explaining to the tearfully grateful Carters that Emily needed rest, medical care, and ongoing spiritual support, and gently suggesting that leaving this house and its troubled history behind might be wise, we packed our worn satchels. The battle here was won. Weeks later, I stood in a sterile, echoing office deep within the Vatican administrative complex. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the shadows of the Carter farmhouse. Across a large, polished desk sat Monsignor Vieri, a man whose face seemed carved from pale marble, his eyes intelligent but devoid of warmth. I delivered my official report. I detailed the possession, the nature of the entity encountered, describing its methods of textual corruption and mimicry carefully, but omitting the specific name, the scribe, and any direct mention of folk magic. I recounted the successful sealing ritual, Emily Carter's liberation. Then, choosing my words with extreme care, I added a section regarding procedural anomalies and potential external interference, impacting the subject's psychological state and the entity's observable behavior, possibly stemming from unorthodox, remote consultation methods. I mentioned concerns regarding the security of sensitive preliminary assessment data. It was veiled, deniable, but the warning was there for those meant to understand it. Monsignor Vieri listened impassively, steepling his fingers, his expression unreadable. He asked a few clarifying questions, his inquiry sharp, precise, clinical, disturbingly reminiscent of Rossi's own detached analysis. When I finished, he simply nodded. Your report is noted, Father Michael. Your diligence in resolving the Carter case is commendable. The congregation will review your findings regarding the anomalies. You are dismissed. Walking back through the vast, echoing marble corridors, surrounded by centuries of faith, power, and secrecy, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with demons. I had faced down the scribe, yes, but Rossi and her faction were still out there, pursuing their cold equations in the shadows. The Monsignor's impassive response felt less like closure and more like a careful political maneuver. I had won the battle for Emily Carter's soul, but stepping out of that office, I felt a distinct, prickling sensation of unseen human eyes watching me, analyzing me, judging my potential threat or utility. I touched the simple wooden cross at my throat. Father Damon's habitual gesture, now feeling like my own necessary shield. The war, I realized with a sinking heart, was far from over. It had merely shifted from the supernatural front line to the colder, more complex battlefield of whispers and shadows within the very institution I served. Amen. 3 rules. 1 soul saved, and 100 questions left behind. The devil wears many faces. But sometimes, the coldest ones sit behind polished desks, holding rosaries in one hand and scalpel-like intentions in the other. This exorcism ended in silence. But silence doesn't mean safety. It means something is still listening. You think you know Salem. Witches, history tours, cheap candles, and black hats sold to tourists. But the stories they tell, they're the safe ones. The rest stays buried until someone dies. Tonight, on Night Creepypasta Rules, we follow Detective Liam Kincaid, new to Salem PD, and already caught in a case the textbooks won't touch. A body near Gallows Hill. A ritual gone wrong. And 3 rules passed down like folklore among the local detectives. Rules that keep you breathing. Or worse, from becoming part of Salem's history yourself. Stay until the end. There's a moment when the dead whisper your name. And when that happens, Rule 3 is all that stands between you and something watching from the dark. If this one haunts you, leave a comment. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules. And remember, the crime isn't always what kills you. Sometimes, it's the name you leave behind. They call it a transfer. Fresh start. I called it exile. From the brass-knuckled reality of Boston homicide, tracking down shooters and dealers, to the kitschy, haunted history tour that was Salem, Massachusetts. Trading gang hits for ghost stories, or so I thought. A penance for the case that went sideways. The judgment call that left a good cop bleeding out and me holding the bag. Then came the first call, before I'd even properly unpacked my cynicism or figured out where to get decent coffee. A body up near Gallows Hill, old house, bad scene, and my new partner, Detective Isabella Diaz, Izzy, telling me the 3 unofficial rules for staying sane, or maybe just alive, while working cases like this. None of them involved Miranda rights. October paints Salem in lurid tourist colors, pointed hats and fake cobwebs, festoon shops selling crystals and kitsch, while guided tours herd sightseers past locations of historical atrocity, repackaged as spooky entertainment. But beneath the performance, something else breathes in the salt-laced air. Something heavy, watchful, and old. It clung like harbor fog as we ducked under the yellow tape, outside the leaning clapboard house on Orchard Street, just a stone's throw from the infamous hill. A small crowd had gathered, phones held high, faces a blend of morbid curiosity and the strange reverence tragedy sometimes inspires. The smell hit first, sharp, coppery, metallic, overlaid with a scent of damp, decaying leaves and something else. Something cloyingly sweet like rotting flowers trying to mask putrefaction. Izzy Diaz met me there, nodding curtly, younger than me by a decade maybe, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to constantly scan the scene, the onlookers, my own weary face. She moved with the easy, slightly wary confidence of a local who understood the town's dual nature. "Detective Kincaid," she said, her voice crisp, professional, but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite decipher. Pragmatism, pity, welcome to the deep end. She gestured towards the house with her chin. Victims inside. Alden Finch, retired professor, history buff. Big surprise there. Looks like he found more genuine Salem history than he bargained for. As we stepped onto the creaking porch boards, she glanced back at the gawking crowd, then lowered her voice slightly. "Just Keep an open mind in there, okay? Salem plays by different rules sometimes, official and otherwise. Was it advice or a test of my reaction? Inside, the air was freezing, unnaturally still despite the open door. Dust mortis danced in the weak shafts of light piercing through grimy windows. Dr. Aris Thorne, the me, knelt beside the body, sprawled awkwardly in the study, amidst overturned books and scattered papers. Thorne, gaunt and precise, moved with a chilling detachment that rumor attributed to being descended from one of the original Salem judges, or perhaps one of the accused, depending on who you asked. He didn't look up immediately. "Evening, detectives," he murmured, his voice dry as old parchment. "Cause of death is perplexing. Significant exsanguination is apparent, yet I find no corresponding wounds sufficient to explain the volume. No signs of forced entry." He adjusted his glasses, finally glancing up, his eyes magnified and unnervingly direct. "And these markings," he indicated crude symbols chalked hastily on the floorboards around the body, "are fascinatingly archaic 17th century apotropaic symbols, meant to ward off evil. Rather poorly executed, I might add. Almost an invitation." He sniffed the air. Ambient temperature is also approximately 8 degrees Celsius below the exterior. Anomalous. He returned his attention to the corpse, his clinical curiosity a disturbing counterpoint to the horror. Izzy pointed her phone camera at the symbols. "Sending these to Vance. Elias Vance owns the Serpent's Eye bookstore down on Essex. If anyone knows what these scribbles mean, it's him." Minutes later, Vance arrived, looking like he'd stepped out of a different century. Tall, thin, clad in slightly rumpled tweed, despite the mild autumn day, smelling faintly of old paper, Earl Grey tea, and something spicy, like cloves. He peered at the symbols through thick-rimmed spectacles, humming thoughtfully. "Ah, yes," he murmured. "Protection sigils, classic forms. But the intention, it's all wrong. The lines waver, the circles are incomplete. This wouldn't ward anything off. More likely to draw attention, like shouting challenges into the dark." He surveyed the room, his usual eccentric twinkle, momentarily replaced by a shadow. "This house, it has echoes." Alden wasn't the first soul troubled within these walls. He met my gaze briefly, his eyes surprisingly sharp. "Be cautious in your inquiries, detective. History here doesn't always stay buried. Sometimes it bites back." After Vance offered a few more historical contexts, and Thorne finished his preliminary examination, Izzy pulled me aside near the study doorway, away from the uniformed officers methodically bagging evidence. Her professional mask was firmly in place, but her eyes held a seriousness that chilled me more than the room's unnatural cold. "Okay, Kincaid," she said, her voice low, confidential. "The unofficial briefing?" The chief looks the other way, pretends he doesn't know. But the detectives who pull cases like this one, the ones that feel wrong, the ones that don't add up right, we have rules. Passed down, detective to detective, not in any manual. You listen, you follow them. No exceptions. Your call if you think it's superstition, but I wouldn't bet my pension on it. I waited. The scent of decay and Thorne's antiseptic spray sharpened my nostrils. "Rule 1, Izzy stated, her gaze steady. "If you dream about the crime, details, the victim, the location, maybe even the next one, before it happens, you keep it locked down. Don't speak of it. Not to me, not to the chief, not to your damn therapist. Acting on the information discreetly is one thing. Giving the dream voice," she shook her head slightly, "that feeds it. Don't. Rule 2. She watched my face closely. "Your weapon, if you're in a situation related to this case, and you reach for your service piece, and it feels wrong, heavy, unnaturally heavy, like it's suddenly filled with lead, resisting your grip. Holster it. Immediately. Do not draw the weapon. Fin another solution. Talk. Back off. Use your cuffs, whatever. But don't draw when it feels like that. It means something in the air doesn't want you to. And rule 3. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper, her eyes intense. This one. Pay attention, Kincaid. If you are with a victim, maybe their last moments, and they look directly at you, and they speak your full name, Liam Kincaid. If that happens, you make damn sure you are not alone that night. Call your partner. Call dispatch. Sleep on the couch at the station. Crash with family if you have any nearby. I don't care how, but do not spend the night alone until the sun comes up. You've been marked. Named. You're vulnerable. She finished speaking. The silence in the old house pressed in, thick and suffocating, broken only by the distant wail of a city siren and the almost inaudible creak of the ancient floorboards upstairs. Marked? Heavy guns? Precognitive dreams? Precognitive dreams? My logical Boston homicide brain screamed that this was collective delusion. Small-town superstition run amok. Yeah! The cold in the room, the Me's anomalies, Vance's cryptic warnings. I reached out instinctively, needing a point of grounding reality, and placed my hand flat against the cool wood of the door frame beside where Alden Finch lay. A jolt, sharp and icy cold, shot up my arm, making me snatch my hand back as it burned. For a dizzying, heart-stopping second, the room flickered before my eyes, overlaid with a different image. Not a memory, not a dream, but a raw flash of visceral terror, darkness, the suffocating feeling of being bound, accusatory faces looming out of shadows, unheard shouts echoing with judgment and hate. Then it snapped back, gone as quickly as it came, leaving only the scent of dust, antique wood, and the undeniable metallic tang of spilled blood, and the chilling certainty that the rules Izzy Diaz had just given me were anything but superstition. Sleep offered no refuge, only a different kind of haunting. The image of Alden Finch, pale and exsanguinated, the crude symbols chalked around him, played on repeat behind my closed eyelids. Then, the scene shifted, coalescing with horrifying clarity. I wasn't at the Orchard Street house anymore. I was standing near the waterfront down by the derelict East Point Wharf, the air thick with the smell of salt, creosote, and decay. A figure lay huddled near a dilapidated shed, shrouded in mist. I knew, with a chilling certainty of dreams, that this was another victim. I saw details. A vibrant red scarf clutched in a lifeless hand, the glint of a small, distinctive silver earring, a freshly carved symbol, identical to the ones at the Finch scene, etched into the shed door beside the body. Then, a shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom near the water. Impossibly tall, impossibly thin, turning towards me. Zimbol. Rule 1 slammed into my consciousness. Don't speak of it. My first instinct was to call Izzy, to report the premonition, the impossible knowledge. But her warning, the weight of local superstition, or protocol, held me back. Giving it voice feeds it. Feeds what? I didn't know. But the fear was real, visceral. At the station later that morning, I played it cool, fueled by caffeine and dread. Izzy, I started, spreading out a map of the waterfront. Call it a hunch, but I was looking over Finch's financials, his known associates, and some whispers about vagrants frequenting those old sheds down there. Maybe we should check it out? See if anyone saw anything unusual the night Finch died. Izzy raised an eyebrow, sipping her coffee. East Point Wall? That place is falling apart. Bit of a long shot based on phone records, Kincaid. Her tone was carefully neutral, but I sensed the scrutiny. Was my hunch too specific? All right, she conceded after a moment. Won't hurt to take a look, I guess. But don't expect much more than rats and rot. Her easy agreement felt slightly off, perhaps too easy. Was she testing me? Before heading to the wharf, the unease drove me to Essex Street, to Elias Vance's bookstore. The Serpent's Eye. It was crammed floor to ceiling with volumes ancient and modern, smelling of dust, binding glue, and dried herbs. Vance emerged from behind a towering stack, pipe smoke curling around his wild gray hair. I described the symbol hypothetically, asking about its historical significance, perhaps related to old maritime rituals or warnings. Vance peered at my crude sketch. Ah, yes. A variation of a binding rune, often misused, meant to contain, but when drawn improperly. He tapped the sketch. It can act as a beacon, especially in places with strong residual energy, like the wharf areas, particularly East Point. Bad things happened there over the centuries. Smuggling, sudden violence, drownings accidental and otherwise. He puffed on his pipe, his eyes sharp. Be careful down there, detective. Belief carries weight in Salem. Fear even more so. They can attract echoes. I drove to the wharf alone first, needing to see if the dream held any water before bringing Izzy. The place was desolate. Collapsing piers, rotting sheds leaning at drunken angles, the gray water of the harbor slapping listlessly against the pilings. I found the specific shed from my dream almost immediately, and there, snagged on a rusted nail near the doorway, was a single strand of bright wool. My blood ran cold. Then the déjà vu hit, overwhelming, making me sway. I had been here before. As I steadied myself, I saw it. A fleeting shadow detaching itself from the side of the shed, impossibly tall and thin, vanishing instantly when I turned my head. Just like the dream, shaken, I scanned the ground near the shed door. The damp earth looked recently disturbed. A small patch churned up, as if something had been hastily buried or uncovered. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just in my head anymore. The red wool fiber was enough to justify an official search, flimsy as it felt under Izzy's questioning gaze. "Good eye, Kincaid," was all she said, her expression unreadable. We canvassed the area, talked to dock workers further down, checked missing persons reports. Nothing solid, just the lingering chill of my dream and the disturbed earth near the shed. We interviewed Alden Finch's distraught nephew again, a nervous young man named Peter, who seemed genuinely grief-stricken, but also evasive about his uncle's recent activities. He was researching something specific, Peter admitted, twisting his hands. Old family lines, property disputes from way back. Said he found something about the wharf area, something that made people angry back then. He couldn't, or wouldn't, elaborate. The air in his tidy apartment felt cold, tense. A few days later, the call came. Another patrol unit, responding to a vagrancy complaint, had found her. Inside the derelict shed at East Point Wharf, a young woman, unidentified, matching the general description for missing persons, though no official ID yet. Red scarf clutched in her hand, single silver earring glinting dully, and carved into the wooden door beside her. Still fresh, the same crude, inviting symbol found at the Finch scene. My dream realized in chilling detail. The nausea rose, hot and acidic. Izzy was already there when I arrived, along with Dr. Thorne. The atmosphere inside the shed was thick with the smell of decay, stagnant water, and that same metallic tang. Thorne knelt beside the body, his examination swift, professional. Similar presentation to Finch, he reported. His voice clipped, apparent exsanguination without sufficient cause. And the symbol, of course. Time of death estimated within the last 12 hours. Izzy was questioning the patrol officers who found the body. They mentioned seeing a shadowy figure slipping away into the fog near the adjacent alley just as they arrived. Tall, thin, one officer said, uncertainty clouding his face. Moved fast. Didn't get a good look. My gut screamed. The figure from the dream. Which way? I asked sharply. The officer pointed towards a narrow, garbage-choked alley between two crumbling warehouses. "I'll check it out," I said, already moving, drawing my flashlight. Izzy nodded. "Backup's on its way. Be careful." The alley was dark, claustrophobic, reeking of brine and refuse. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom. Halfway down, I saw movement. A flicker of darkness disappearing around a stack of discarded crates at the far end. "Police! Stop!" I yelled, instinct taking over. My hand went to the Glock holstered at my hip, and froze. The weapon felt like it was bolted to my side. Impossibly heavy, inert, like trying to lift solid iron. My fingers strained, but the gun wouldn't move, wouldn't even shift in the holster. Rule of 2 slammed into my mind. If it feels heavier, don't draw it. Panic warred with ingrained training. I needed that weapon, but the resistance felt absolute, unnatural. I forced my hand away, heart pounding, relying instead on my voice, shouting again, "Police! Show yourself!" The shadows at the end of the alley remained still. No sound. After a tense minute, I cautiously advanced, flashlight beam sweeping. Nothing, just damp brick walls, overflowing dumpsters, and the oppressive weight of the Salem night. Whoever had been there was gone, or had never been there at all. The feeling of the heavy, immovable gun left me deeply shaken, questioning my own perception of threat. Back at the morgue, reviewing Thorne's preliminary findings, the clinical coldness of the place felt almost welcome after the alley. Thorne confirmed the exsanguination anomaly, the identical symbol. I mentioned, trying to sound casual, a moment of hesitation, maybe muscle cramp, when reaching for my weapon earlier. Thorne adjusted his spectacles, peering at me over the rims. "Stress manifests unusually under specific atmospheric conditions, detective," he said smoothly. "Adrenaline fatigue, localized humidity affecting grip." Or his voice dropped slightly, a glint of academic curiosity in his eyes. One could consult the Mather diaries, fascinating accounts of spectral lethargy or witch weights inhibiting defensive actions during the 1692 testimonies. Purely historical perspective, naturally. He turned back to his instruments, leaving me cold. Later that night, staring at the crime scene photos on my laptop, trying to force logic onto the illogical, I caught my reflection in the dark screen. For a terrifying instant, the face staring back wasn't mine. It was contorted in a mask of primal terror. Eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. Looking decades older, I recoiled, shutting the laptop abruptly, the image burning behind my eyelids. The investigation hit a wall. 2 victims, exsanguinated, marked with the same symbol, linked only by a shared interest in obscure Salem history and possibly the wharf area. We chased down leads, disgruntled relatives of Finch, known associates of the unidentified wharf victim. We eventually ID'd her as Sarah Bishop, a visiting student researching colonial trade. Every avenue felt like a dead end. Interviews yielding nervous denials or superstitious whispers. Evidence seemed thin, almost deliberately scrubbed. The pressure from the chief and the city mounted, and the feeling intensified, not just of being watched, but of being measured. Cold spots seemed to follow me, appearing suddenly in my apartment, my car. Even at the station, I started hearing whispers at the edge of my hearing, indistinct but carrying tones of accusation, of judgment. Sleep was fragmented, haunted by echoes of my dream, by the feeling of that heavy gun. Paranoia became my constant companion. We caught a break, or what felt like one, 3 days later. A 911 call reporting a disturbance, shouting near an old, disused section of the Charter Street Cemetery. We arrived to find chaos, overturned headstones, freshly dug earth, and a 3rd victim, barely alive, lying near a crumbling mausoleum. Young man, maybe homeless, maybe another researcher. He clutched a small leather-bound diary, and the same crude symbol was hastily scratched onto the mausoleum door. Paramedics were working frantically, but his breathing was shallow, his eyes fluttering. I knelt beside him, Izzy right behind me, scanning the surroundings. "Can you tell us what happened?" I asked gently. "Who did this?" His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then locking onto mine with sudden, terrifying clarity and intensity. A flicker of recognition. No. Something colder. Deeper. His lips moved, forming words with his last rattling breaths. He didn't name an attacker. He didn't describe what happened. He looked straight into my soul and whispered, his voice impossibly loud in the sudden hush. "Liam Kincaid. He sees you. Always then." A final shuddering exhale, and his eyes went vacant. The paramedic beside me cursed softly, checking for a pulse, then shook his head. "Time of death noted. Silence. Rule 3. Victim's last words are your full name." The world tilted. The sounds of the cemetery, the wind, the distant traffic, the paramedics packing up, faded into a dull roar in my ears. Her face was pale beneath the flickering emergency lights, but her expression wasn't shock or pity. It was a grim, almost practiced determination. "Okay," she said, her voice low, tight, leaving no room for argument. "Rule 3. Now, you're with me tonight, Kincaid. My place. Department protocol. Unofficial protocol, but absolute on this one. You are not spending the night alone." Her insistence felt less like partnership, more like taking custody. The drive to her small apartment near the outskirts of town was silent, suffocating. I felt like a specimen under glass, watched not just by whatever entity had marked me, but by my own partner. I tried calling Jessica, needing to hear a voice from the real world. She answered, heard the tremor in my voice, and dissolved into frantic tears, pleading with me to quit, to leave Salem immediately, offering to drive down herself. Her panic only amplified my own sense of entrapment. Later, unable to even pretend to rest on Izzy's uncomfortable couch, the city lights painting alien patterns on her ceiling, I risked a call to Elias Vance. I explained, my voice barely a whisper, that Rule 3 had been invoked. The line was silent for a long moment. Then Vance sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "The marking," he said softly. "It happens when the influence recognizes a specific focus, an observer who gets too close. The moment of death, the peak trauma, acts as an anchor, imprinting your identity onto its awareness. It attunes itself to you." He paused. "Isolation, detective, is now your greatest vulnerability. When you are alone, especially at night, its influence has clearer purchase. Nightmares, suggestions, paranoia. It will try to wear you down, make you susceptible, make you make a mistake. You were right not to be alone. Stay watchful." Just as I was about to thank him, hanging up with trembling hands, my gaze drifted towards Izzy's living room window, standing just outside on the fire escape, partially obscured by shadow but unmistakably clear for a horrifying instant, was the figure of the young man from the cemetery. His eyes were fixed on me. He raised a single finger and pointed directly at me. Then he dissolved, melting back into the brickwork and the night. He saw me, always. Being marked changes things. The constant, low-level dread I'd felt since arriving in Salem coalesced into a sharp, persistent prickle at the base of my skull. The feeling of unseen eyes constantly evaluating me, waiting for a misstep. Sleep was shallow, fragmented by echoes of the dying man's whisper. "Liam Kincaid, he sees you, always." Izzy's forced hospitality felt more like house arrest, her pragmatic concern tinged with an unnerving watchfulness. I wasn't just investigating a case anymore. I felt like I was the case, confined mostly to the station or Izzy's small apartment, under the guise of procedural safety. I threw myself into the files, searching for a pattern that wasn't just superstition. Alden Finch's research notes, salvaged from the first crime scene, were meticulous, obsessive. He, along with a second victim, Sarah Bishop, and apparently the young man in the cemetery, Michael Chen, had all been digging into the same knot of 17th century land disputes and accusations. Specifically, properties near Gallows Hill, whose ownership traced back through families implicated on both sides of the 1692 trials. Accusers and accused. Their descendants intertwined over centuries. The crude symbol wasn't just generic wording. Vance had confirmed it was a bastardized version of a marker used historically to denote contested or cursed land. The entity wasn't just feeding on random fear. It was feeding on the specific energy of accusation, paranoia, and unresolved injustice, rooted deep in Salem soil. It clung to those old wounds like a shroud. And Izzy, reviewing my notes, her consistent deflections became glaringly obvious. Every time a lead pointed towards one of those historically sensitive properties or prominent local families tied to them, she gently steered us elsewhere, citing lack of evidence, jurisdictional issues, prioritizing more concrete leads that invariably led nowhere. Her intimate knowledge of the rules, her immediate enforcement of Rule 3 keeping me under her watchful eye, it wasn't just procedure. It was control. Late one night, the station quiet, except for the hum of computers and the distant wail of a siren. I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I found Izzy in the deserted briefing room, reviewing case files under the harsh fluorescent lights. "We need to talk, Izzy," I said, keeping my voice level, dropping a highlighted copy of Finch's research notes onto the table in front of her. "About this pattern. Finch, Bishop, Chen, they were all poking the same hornet's nest. Old land claims, families tied directly to the trials. The symbol confirms it." She looked up, her expression carefully neutral. But I saw the flicker of apprehension in her eyes. "It's Salem, Kincaid. Everything ties back to the trials eventually. Doesn't mean you systematically steered us away every time those specific names or locations came up," I interrupted, leaning forward. "Doesn't explain why you know these unofficial rules like the back of your hand, rules that conveniently keep investigators isolated, second-guessing themselves or under observation." I tapped the notes. "Rule 3 kept me right where you could see me after I was marked." "Why?" Her professional facade crumbled, not into malice, but into a deep, weary fear, mixed with fierce, almost tribal loyalty. "You don't understand," she whispered, glancing nervously towards the darkened corners of the room. "This town, it has a memory. That thing, the influence, whatever you want to call it, it feeds on dredging up the past, on accusations. Especially those accusations. So you bury the leads, protect certain families, protect the town," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "My family has been here since before the trials. We know how it works. When outsiders come digging, stirring things up, pointing fingers at those old wounds, the influence flares. People get hurt. It needs a focus, Kincaid. Better it focuses on someone poking around the edges, someone disposable." Her eyes flickered towards me, then away guiltily. "In a way, then have it turn its full attention back on the core families. The ones who carry the real weight of that history. I don't know who's doing the killing. Maybe someone unstable. Maybe someone influenced by it. But my job, my duty, is to keep the infection contained. Keep the balance, even if it means..." She trailed off, unable to voice the implication. She trailed off, unable to voice the implication, even if it means letting it mark me, using the rules to manage me. The cold certainty of her betrayal settled in my gut. The confession, the raw fear and accusation hanging heavy in the sterile air of the station, acted like blood in the water. The entity, wherever it lurked, responded. The fluorescent lights overhead didn't just flicker. They began to strobe violently, casting the room in flashes of harsh white and disorienting darkness. The temperature plummeted, frost instantly blooming on the metal window frames, and the whispers started, not at the edge of hearing now, but inside my head. A cacophony of overlapping voices, ancient and modern. Accuse her. Liar! Liar! He knows. Your fault, Kincaid. Echoes of Boston. She protects the guilty. Condemn her. The room seemed to shimmer, the walls momentarily indistinct, overlaid with the ghostly image of rough wooden beams. A crowded courtroom, stern faces staring down in judgment. The weight of centuries of accusation pressed down on me, urging me to point the finger, to join the chorus. My hand instinctively twitched towards my holster. The Glock felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, an anchor dragging me down, resisting the urge to draw, to defend, to attack. Rule 2. The entity was feeding on the confrontation, amplifying the paranoia, trying to force my hand. Izzy recoiled, her face white with terror, fumbling at her collar, maybe for a hidden charm, starting to whisper a frantic, repetitive prayer or a rhyme under her breath. Something local, protective, utterly inadequate against the storm we do. Unleashed. Then a flash of imagery, sharp and terrifying, not a dream, but a projection slammed into my mind. Me, standing over Izzy's prone form, smoke curling from the barrel of my gun. Or me, dragged away in cuffs, Izzy pointing, her face triumphant or terrified. Rule 1's echo, a vision of a future crime. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the psychic onslaught, refusing to speak the vision, refusing to accuse Izzy aloud, despite the screaming pressure in my skull. I staggered back, pressing my hands to my temples, trying to anchor myself in logic, in procedure, against the rising tide of paranoia and hallucinatory accusation. Izzy continued her frantic whispering, uselessly trying to placate the unseen. The light strobed. The whispers shrieked. The weight of the gun was immense, and the very air crackled with unseen judgment, pressing in, demanding a verdict, demanding I break the rules, demanding I become another Salem accuser. The psychic storm broke, not with a thunderclap, but with a receding tide. My desperate focus on hard facts, case numbers, forensic reports, the lack of concrete evidence tying Izzy directly to the murders despite her manipulation, seemed to act as an anchor against the hallucinatory tempest of accusation. Shouting verifiable details into the swirling chaos felt absurd, yet strangely effective. The whispering voices faltered, the spectral courtroom flickered and dissolved. The crushing weight of judgment lessened, leaving behind a profound psychic exhaustion and the stale smell of fear. Izzy Diaz crumpled to the floor, not physically harmed, but broken, sobbing uncontrollably. The pragmatic mask shattered, revealing only raw generational terror beneath. Uniformed officers, drawn by the earlier commotion, or perhaps Izzy's own panicked call before the climax, arrived to find a scene of psychological devastation rather than physical violence. Izzy was eventually led away, not in handcuffs, but escorted for evaluation, clearly unfit for duty, muttering about balance, curses, and things outsiders shouldn't stir. Her career was over, her betrayal laid bare, yet she was also just another victim of Salem's long shadow. The immediate supernatural pressure lifted significantly, but the air in the station felt tainted, the silence heavy with unspoken history. I knew with chilling certainty that the entity, the ambient dread fueled by accusation, hadn't been banished, merely quieted. Now the intense emotional discharge of the confrontation had passed, and the mark on me, the chilling echo of Rule 3, remained. A cold spot in my soul, a constant feeling of being watched. With Izzy sidelined, the investigation fell squarely on my shoulders. But now, free from her subtle misdirection, the path seemed clearer, illuminated by the grim light of understanding. I revisited the evidence, Finch's notes, the victim's research. The connection wasn't just general history. It was laser-focused on a specific, notoriously bitter land dispute dating back to the late 17th century, involving accusations of witchcraft, directly tied to property claims near Gallows Hill. The families involved, descendants of both the original accusers and the executed, still lived in Salem, their names woven into the fabric of the town. I presented my focused findings, the specific land deed, the linked family names, to Dr. Thorne. He listened, his usual clinical detachment perhaps softened slightly by the bizarre events he'd peripherally witnessed. He re-examined forensic evidence from all three victims, discovering trace amounts of a rare local clay, unique to the soil composition of that specific contested property, previously dismissed as environmental contamination. It suggests, Thorne stated carefully, polishing his glasses, a common point of origin or contact for all victims shortly before death. Armed with this, I visited Elias Vance again at the Serpent's Eye. I laid out the family names, the land dispute connection. Vance nodded slowly, tamping tobacco into his pipe, his eyes clouded with grim recognition. Ah, the Proctor-Nurse contention, Lance. Aye, that runs deep. Poisonous roots. He confirmed the recent resurgence of the dispute, fueled by proposed development plans. Then he identified the potential human element. There's one descendant, on the Proctor side. A young man named Samuel Forrester. Always felt his family was cheated. Obsessed with the history, the perceived injustice. Not entirely stable, especially when he drinks. Lives near the old property line. Suddenly, the pieces clicked. An unstable individual, steeped in historical grievance, obsessed with injustice. The perfect vessel for Salem's ambient malevolence to latch onto, amplifying his resentment into murderous rage against those he saw as representing the other sides, against those he saw as representing the other side. Digging into his perceived birthright, the entity didn't need to possess. It just needed fertile, hateful ground to cultivate. The lingering threat felt clearer now. It wasn't just a diffuse haunting. It was linked to specific historical wounds, amplified by human obsession. And I was still marked, still vulnerable, needing to apprehend a killer, potentially operating with a supernatural tailwind. Rule of 3 wasn't just a warning. It was a condition of my continued existence in this town. I meticulously arranged for backup, ensuring I wouldn't be alone when I went to find Samuel Forrester. We found Samuel Forrester not at his listed address, but at the epicenter of his obsession. The dilapidated Saltbox House, standing on the edge of the historically contested land near Gallows Hill. The place felt cold, neglected, filled with Forrester's frantic research. Maps, genealogical charts, printouts covered in angry annotations, and the crude symbol, the bastardized binding rune, was scratched onto doorways, windowsills, even the floor. A desperate, flawed attempt at protection, or perhaps ownership. He didn't come quietly. Forrester, wild-eyed and disheveled, met us on the porch, ranting about stolen legacies, spectral injustices, how the victims deserved what they got, for disturbing sacred ground, for representing the families who wronged his ancestors. He wasn't possessed, not in the way Emily Carter had been, but his paranoia, his grievance, felt unnaturally heightened, amplified, given a sharp, dangerous edge by the unseen influence clinging to this place, feeding on his rage. As we moved to apprehend him, the atmosphere thickened. Whispers seemed to curl out of the shadowed corners of the old house, unintelligible but filled with malice accusation, aimed at Forrester, at me. The air grew bitingly cold, The air grew bitingly cold. I saw Forrester flinch, glancing nervously at the shadows, momentarily distracted. I moved to cuff him, my hand automatically going towards my hip, towards my weapon, as he made a sudden, unpredictable movement. Heavy. Rule 2. The Glock felt like lead again, resisting my draw with that sickening, unnatural weight. The entity was present, reacting to the confrontation, to the intent. I forced my hand away, relying on training, using leverage and a sharp command to bring Forrester down while fighting the disorienting whispers coiling in my own head. My backup moved in, securing him. Forrester continued to rave as we led him away, spitting accusations rooted in centuries-old disputes, his eyes burning with a conviction that felt both entirely human and chillingly amplified. He was the instrument, the focal point for the entity's latest cycle, fueled by Salem's undying obsession with its own past. The case closed, legally speaking. Forrester confessed, his narrative a tangled mess of historical grievance and paranoid delusion, clearly exacerbated by an external influence neither he nor the courts would ever acknowledge. Izzy Diaz faced a departmental inquiry. Her career in Salem law enforcement was over, though the strangeness of the case likely shielded her from criminal charges. She became another Salem story, whispered about, another casualty of the town's tangled roots. I requested, and was granted, a transfer. Back to Boston, perhaps, or somewhere far removed from the lingering chill of the North Shore. I left Salem under a cold November sky, the tourist season over, the town settling back into its quieter, perhaps more authentic, state of watchful unease. The immediate threat felt contained. Forrester arrested, the entity's current focus disrupted, but the mark remained. Months later, living in a nondescript apartment in a city far from Massachusetts, trying to reassemble a semblance of a normal life, the haunting followed. Not with whispers or cold spots, but with quiet, chilling intimacy. One frosty morning, I walked past the bathroom mirror after a shower, steamed over, opaque, but traced clearly in the condensation, as if by an unseen finger drawing from the inside, were two words. Liam Kincaid. I stared, the blood draining from my face. The chill wasn't just memory, it was presence. I wiped the glass furiously, smearing the name away, but the image remained burned onto my retinas. Rule 3 hadn't expired when I left Salem's borders. It wasn't tied to proximity, it was tied to me. The entity, the ambient weight of accusation and history saw me. It knew my name. The casebook could be closed, stamped, filed away, but my own page remained terrifyingly open, marked for a chapter yet unwritten, forever watched by the ghosts of Salem, always. Some cases close with handcuffs, some with bullets, but this one ends with a mirror, and my name written in the steam. I left Salem, I left the shadows, but the rules, they followed me. Because when a dying man speaks your name, you don't go back to your old life. You just pray he doesn't speak it again. Which rule would you break first? Drop it in the comments. And if you've ever dreamed of something before it happened, subscribe. You might already be marked. They say you shouldn't open strange emails at work. Evelyn Reed didn't, and it still found her. Welcome to Night Creepypasta Rules, where stories don't just chill your bones, they crawl into your hard drive. This episode, one of our most chilling yet. A story buried inside a data center. A woman haunted by rules no manual ever printed. And an entity that's not just watching her, it's watching you too. Well, if you love digital horror, uncanny twists, and high-tech nightmares, subscribe now. And let us know in the comments, would you follow the rules or break them? Now, dim the lights, put on your headphones, and don't look away from the screen, because this email is not a warning. Rows of humming servers, aisle after identical aisle, stretching into the cool, artificially lit distance. The endless silent scroll of archived data across my multiple monitors. The faint, sterile scent of ozone and industrial-grade carpet cleaner pumped through the vents. This was my world. 5 days a week. 8, no, usually 10 hours a day. Inside the climate-controlled belly of OmniArc Solutions, a vast data tomb nestled anonymously in North Carolina's Research Triangle Park. Precision was everything here. Accuracy, redundancy, pungency. I was Dr. Evelyn Reed, digital archivist, meticulous curator of dead information, hired for my obsessive attention to detail, a trait my previous employer had less charitably termed affixated right before showing me the door after one costly decimal point error. This job, this sterile sanctuary of humming fans and flickering lathes, was my second chance. My penance paid in petabytes. I couldn't afford another mistake. The low, omnipresent hum of the server racks was the building's heartbeat, a sound so constant it usually faded into the background. Usually. Today it seemed louder, somehow more insistent, vibrating up through the soles of my ergonomic shoes. Fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, casting an unchanging, shadowless glare that made distinguishing morning from afternoon impossible without glancing at the system clock. Isolation was a side effect of the job. Even in the relatively open-plan section where analysts like me worked, the high cubicle walls and the sheer scale of the place fostered a sense of being adrift in a sea of cold technology. Morning, Ev. Ready to dive into the Nightingale archives. Mark Chen's voice, overly cheerful as always, startled me. He leaned over my cubicle wall, holding 2 steaming mugs. Brought coffee. The good stuff from the 3rd floor machine, not that sludge downstairs. He placed one on my desk. Mark was friendly, always ready with office gossip or a shared complaint about deadlines. But beneath the easy smile, I sometimes sensed a current of nervous energy, a competitive edge that mirrored the relentless pressure we were all under. Today, the shadows under his eyes were deeper than usual. Thanks, Mark. Already drowning in Nightingale, I sighed, gesturing at the dense lines of code and metadata filling my screen. Records from a controversial early biodigital research project the company had acquired and now needed meticulously archived. It's dense. Tell me about it, he grimaced. Sterling was already asking about your progress metrics this morning. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Heard anything back about that system access request you put in? Before I could answer, a quiet figure moved efficiently down the aisle. Jian Li from its support, small, precise, always dressed in practical grays and blacks. She moved like a ghost between the humming server racks, her eyes constantly scanning network connection lights, diagnostic panels. She paused near my workstation, her gaze lingering for just a fraction of a second too long on my active network port light before moving on. Her expression impassive but radiating a kind of hyper-vigilance that always seemed slightly out of place. She never stopped long enough for small talk. As if summoned by Mark's mention of him, Mr. David Sterling, our unit supervisor, appeared at the end of the row, tall, impeccably dressed, exuding an aura of smooth corporate control. Though I noticed his habit of constantly adjusting his already perfectly knotted tie. Reed, he addressed me, glancing pointedly at his expensive watch. Nightingale status? We need those initial integrity reports by IOD Friday. Client is getting anxious. He spotted the slight flicker on one of my secondary monitors. Everything functioning within parameters. Report any system lag immediately. Just a minor screen flicker, Mr. Sterling, I said quickly, probably eye strain. He frowned slightly but nodded. Keep caffeine intake monitored, and keep hitting those targets. He swept away towards his glass-walled office, overlooking the data floor. Mark rolled his eyes behind Sterling's back, then gave me a sympathetic grimace before retreating to his own cubicle. Left alone again with the humming servers and the silent data streams, I refocused on the Nightingale archives. That's when I saw it. A new email at the top of my inbox. The sender field was jarringly simple, instantly wrong. DNLAD my name, spelled backwards. No domain, no suffix, just that. The subject line was blank. My stomach gave a cold lurch. Phishing attempt? Weird system glitch? A prank from Mark? It felt different, more personal, more unsettling. My cursor hovered over the sender name, and my main monitor flickered sharply. Just once. The same monitor Sterling had noticed. Coincidence? Had to be, trying to shake off the unease. I decided to search the internal knowledge base for protocols on handling oddly addressed internal mail. Maybe a known server bug. I typed in keywords: email anomaly, sender error, legacy system quirks. Most results were standard procedures. But one link pointed to an old archived digital orientation file from years ago, titled simply Omniarch Legacy. Protocols. Deprecated. Curious, I clicked it. The file opened strangely, most of the text displaying as corrupted characters, blocks of meaningless symbols like digital snow, but nestled within the gibberish, under a heading that was somehow perfectly legible: Legacy System Anomaly Protocols, unofficial use with extreme caution, were 3 bullet points, rendered in stark, clear type. If incoming mail sender address precisely mirrors recipient name in reverse character order, do not open. Delete immediately. Escalation protocol, none. If email content contains an active, non-user initiated countdown timer linked to system functions, do not allow timer to reach 0. Intervention required. See Appendix C. Corrupted. If email body concludes with the exact phrase, "This is not a warning," believe it. Initiate immediate localized data quarantine physical disconnect if feasible. My breath caught. My name backwards. Do not open. This wasn't standard protocol. This wasn't standard protocol. This felt like something buried. Something someone didn't want easily found. A chill snaked down my spine that had nothing to do with the data center's climate control. I quickly minimized the corrupted file, glancing back at my inbox list. As my cursor hovered again over the email from Dear Nile, the line of text seemed to vibrate almost imperceptibly on the screen, the letters blurring for a split second, as if struggling to maintain their digital form against some unseen pressure. Delay immediately. The first rule. My hand trembled slightly as I selected the email and hit the delete key, sending it into the digital void without a second thought. But the unease remained, cold and heavy, settling in the pit of my stomach amidst the constant, unwavering hum of the machines. The mundane hum of the Omniarch service became the soundtrack to my mounting anxiety. I tried to focus on the intricate metadata of the Nightingale archives, tried to lose myself in the familiar comfort of structured data. But the email from Dear Nilev sat like a digital time bomb in my deleted items folder, its very existence a violation of logic. I followed Rule 1, deleted it instantly, but the unease lingered, cold and persistent. It wasn't just one email. Over the next 2 days they kept coming, always from Dear Nilev, always bypassing the company's aggressive spam filters. The subject lines evolved from blank or random characters to chillingly specific phrases. Query and Nightingale access, and later simply, "I see you, Evelyn." Each arrival sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Each time, my hand hovered over the open command out of sheer, morbid curiosity. What was this thing? Before Rule 1, stark and absolute from that corrupted orientation file, forced me to hit delete. My deleted items folder became a graveyard of unopened threats. I started feeling watched, not by colleagues, but through the monitor itself, as if unseen eyes were tracking my cursor movements from within the machine. What? F. Everything okay? Mark Shen leaned over the cubicle wall one afternoon, startling me so badly I nearly knocked over my lukewarm coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Or at least gotten hit with that fatal system error we all dread. He chuckled, but it sounded slightly strained. The pressure of the Nightingale project was getting to everyone. Seriously, though, you seemed jumpy. Just buried in these Nightingale files, I deflected, forcing a smile. It's intense. Mentioning the emails felt impossible, paranoid. That evening, checking data integrity logs for the section I'd worked on that morning, I found it. A significant block of Nightingale archive data, meticulously verified just hours earlier, was now flagged as corrupted. Not deleted, but scrambled nonsensical. I checked the server timestamp for the corruption event. It matched, almost to the second, the arrival time of the "I see you" Evelyn email I had deleted without opening. Coincidence? My logical mind screamed against it, but the cold knot of fear in my stomach tightened. I considered reporting the corruption to Jian Li. But how? Explain I suspected it was linked to emails from my own name, spelled backwards. She already seemed hyper-vigilant about security. Reporting something so bizarre, so rule-breaking according to that hidden protocol, might flag me as unstable or a security risk. What if, trying to help, she investigated the sender address and inadvertently triggered whatever rule one was meant to prevent? The thought kept me silent. I called my friend Jessica that night, needing an anchor to the normal world outside Omniarch's humming walls. I described the work pressure, the glitches, omitting the truly strange email details. Sounds like classic burnout, Evie. She sympathized, though I could hear the distance in her voice. That place sounds like a soul-crushing data mine. You need a vacation, seriously. Or a new job. Her well-meaning advice only highlighted my isolation. She wouldn't understand. No one would. Back at my workstation the next day, the feeling of being watched intensified. I started seeing things, or thinking I did. Fleeting movements reflected in the dark surface of my monitor when it powered down briefly. Shadows coalescing and dissipating, just at the edge of my vision near the server racks. I was losing it. Or maybe Rule 1 wasn't just about not opening an email. Maybe it was about not letting it know I was aware. And now it knew. A fragile, tense quiet settled over the next few days. No more emails from dear Naliv. The data corruption seemed contained to that one incident. I buried myself in the Nightingale archives, working with obsessive focus, trying to convince myself the weirdness had been a stress-induced anomaly, a system glitch exacerbated by finding that bizarre legacy protocol file. Maybe Jessica was right. Maybe I just needed rest. The illusion shattered on Thursday afternoon. An email landed in my inbox, marked high priority. The sender appeared legitimate, tagged as internal alert at Omniarch. At Omniarch, EXORCIST, a system notification address. The subject line was stark. Project Nightingale Deletion Protocol. Stage 1 initiated. My blood ran cold. I clicked it open, heart hammering. The body was chillingly minimal. A few lines of technical jargon about data purging, archive integrity checks, and then, dominating the center of the screen, a stark, blocky, digital countdown timer. 9:59. It ticked down audibly through my headphones, a synthesized, relentless beat. 9:58, 9:57 rule. 2 flashed in my mind. Don't let it reach 0. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a test. This was Index 0, or whatever it was, actively trying to destroy the very archive I was working on. Panic seized me. 9 minutes, reporting this through normal channels. Ticketing Jian, explaining to Sterling, would take far too long. I'd demand explanations I couldn't give without sounding insane. I needed direct intervention. Server room access, maybe physically disconnecting the Nightingale server block. That required overriding security protocols. Admin access I didn't have. Jian. I needed Jian's access, but I couldn't tell her why. Jian, I called out. keeping my voice as level as possible. Despite the internal chaos, rushing towards the IT hub at the end of the aisle, my workstation just completely locked up while accessing the Nightingale primary index. Getting critical errors, a fabrication but hopefully believable enough. Jian looked up, annoyance briefly crossing her usually impassive face. Did you try rebooting? No time, I insisted, glancing desperately back at my screen, where the timer now showed 7:43. It's affecting the core files, seems urgent. Reluctantly, she followed me back. As she leaned over my keyboard, typing rapidly, accessing diagnostics with her admin privileges, I saw my chance. While her attention was focused on the fabricated errors I described, I subtly used her momentary system override to execute a different command string, one I'd noted from a system architecture diagram, designed to force remount a specific server on blocks connection, effectively kicking it offline temporarily. My fingers flew across the keyboard, heart pounding. Command accepted. On my screen, the countdown froze at 1:17, then vanished, replaced by a standard system connection timed out error. I slumped back in my chair, relief washing over me in a dizzying wave. The relief was short-lived. Alarms blared softly through the data center. Localized server outage. Sterling appeared almost instantly, face thunderous. Reed, what the hell did you just do? Server block 7 just went offline. Before I could stammer an excuse, Giant's fingers flew across her diagnostic terminal. Mean or sync error during remount, she reported calmly, though her eyes, when they flickered towards me, were cold, calculating. Forcing reconnection now. Should be back online momentarily. Within seconds, the alarm silenced. Block 7 reappeared on the network map. She hadn't questioned my fabricated lockup. She'd fixed the result of my desperate intervention without batting an eye. But as she gathered her tools, her gaze lingered on my screen, where the timeout error still glowed, then shifted to me. It was a long, searching, deeply suspicious look that sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. She knew I'd done something deliberate. Did she suspect why? Mark peered over the cubicle wall, wide-eyed. Geez, F. What was that? Sounded like the apocalypse for a second there, as Jian walked away without another word, and Sterling launched into a stern lecture about following proper procedures. I felt an intense blast of frigid air from the server rack vents nearest my desk, far colder than the standard climate. Control. The overhead lights flickered violently for a long moment, then stabilized, leaving me shivering, not just from the cold, but from the chilling certainty that I had just interfered with something powerful and drawn unwelcome attention. The aftermath of the countdown incident left an uneasy quiet, like the stillness after a major electrical storm. Sterling gave me a formal warning about unauthorized system actions. Mark kept giving me concerned, slightly fearful glances, and Jian avoided me, but I felt her eyes on me sometimes across the data floor. Her usual quietness now feeling like intense, focused scrutiny. The feeling of being watched wasn't just paranoia anymore. It felt targeted, analytical. I worked meticulously, keeping my head down, but the fear gnawed at me. What was Index 0? What did it want? Why the rules? Driven by a need to understand, I spent my evenings digging into Omniarch's digital past, using secured library networks, searching archived news databases, obscure tech forums. I found whispers, rumors, data corruption incidents hushed up years ago, employees quitting suddenly or suffering breakdowns after working on specific legacy projects, vague mentions of server block 7, the Nightingale block, being temperamental. One fragmented forum post mentioned an employee suicide linked to Project Nightingale's early, ethically dubious phase, hinting at experimental neural interface tech. Nothing concrete, but enough to paint a disturbing picture. Then late one Friday afternoon, just as I was packing up, another email arrived. Sender, dear Nilev. My blood turned to ice. Subject, your turn. My hand trembled as I clicked it open, violating Rule 1, but propelled by a certainty that ignoring it now was pointless. The email body was disturbing, a flickering, corrupted image file that seemed to shift between static lines of binary code and a horrifyingly distorted, pixelated image that looked disturbingly like my own face, frozen in a silent screen. Beneath it, a single line of text, perfectly clear, chillingly calm. This is not a warning. Rule 3. Believe it. The word slammed into me with physical force. This wasn't a test, not a countdown, not a subtle glitch. This was the precursor to direct action. Based on the image, the subject line, the action was directed at me. My mind raced. What would it do? Corrupt my personal files? Lock me out of the system? Fry my workstation? Or something worse? The previous manifestations had been digital, system-focused. But the image, the personal subject line, the finality of the message, it felt like an escalation. Something immediate, potentially physical. React now. My first instinct was digital defense, but the message felt like it had already bypassed that. I needed to sever the connection physically. I didn't hesitate. I dropped to my knees behind my desk, yanking frantically at the tangle of cables connecting my workstation. Network cable first. Pulled it free with a sharp tug. Then the main power cord to the CPU tower. I ripped it from the wall socket just as the screen, which had displayed the horrifying email, abruptly went black, plunging my cubicle into relative darkness. But it wasn't fast enough. Even as the screen died, a high-pitched, piercing digital screech erupted from the dead speakers on my desk. An ear-splitting shriek of corrupted data and pure electronic rage that made me clap my hands over my ears. The lights directly above my cubicle strobed violently, independently of the rest of the office lights, flashing in a blinding, chaotic rhythm. What the hell was that? Mark shouted from his cubicle, standing up looking pale and alarmed. Sterling came rushing over, face livid. Read, report. What is going on with your workstation? Then Jianli was there, moving with startling speed. She didn't look at me or Sterling. Her eyes were fixed on my dead monitor, the now silent speakers. She took in the disconnected cables, my panic state. Her face was a mask of intense concentration, mixed with something that looked disturbingly like recognition. Without a word, she pushed past me, plugged a small, sophisticated-looking diagnostic tool into a nearby network port, her fingers flying across its tiny interface. As she worked, her own tablet screen resting on my desk flickered, and this time, I saw it clearly, reflected for just an instant in the dark surface of my dead monitor, before she quickly angled the tablet away. A faint overlay of flickering green binary code, scrolling rapidly across the bottom edge of her display, a hidden diagnostic, or something else. The screech had stopped. The lights above my cubicle stabilized. Jian unplugged her device, her expression grim. Localized power surge, she announced curtly, not looking at me or Sterling. Caused residual feedback in the audio drivers and destabilized the local lighting grid. Recommend a full hardware diagnostic for this workstation, Mr. Sterling. It seems compromised. That was one word for it. As Jian coolly gathered her equipment, avoiding my eyes, I knew with chilling certainty. She hadn't just diagnosed a surge. She had recognized an attack, and she knew exactly what, or who, was responsible. The sterile hum of the data center felt like a living thing now, watchful, waiting. After the Rule 3 incident, the screeching speakers, the strobing lights, John Lie's unnervingly calm efficiency amidst the chaos, and that binary code flickering on her screen. My carefully constructed denial crumbled completely. This wasn't random glitches or stress. It was intelligent, hostile, and Jan knew far more than she let on. Her constant vigilance wasn't just diligence, it was monitoring. Her quietness wasn't shyness, it was secrecy. The rules weren't quirks, they were containment. I needed proof, needed leverage, needed to understand what I was truly up against, driven by a cold dread mixed with burgeoning anger. I spent hours after my shift pretending to catch up on work, instead running deep diagnostic searches on OmniArc's internal logs, cross-referencing system errors with Giant's access records, using every analytical skill I possessed. The patterns emerged from the digital noise, inexplicable gaps in security logs coinciding with reported glitches. Jian's admin credentials accessing server block 7, the Nightingale archive block, with obsessive frequency, often remotely during off hours. Subtly altered diagnostic reports downplaying anomalies. And finally, the smoking gun. Fragments of encrypted code embedded deep within the legacy system diagnostics. Code that referenced error handling routines, matching the exact descriptions of Rule 1, 2, and 3. She hadn't just known the rules. She had likely written, or at least implemented, parts of the protocols herself, armed with screenshots and log files saved to a secure personal drive. I waited until the late shift thinned out, until Sterling had departed in his pristine sedan, until Mark Chen had wished me a tired goodnight. I found Jian where I expected her to be, in the heart of the machine, the main server room, a vast cold cathedral of humming racks, bathed in the blinking constellation of countless lead status lights. The air was frigid, smelling sharply of ozone and filtered air. I let the heavy access control door hiss shut behind me, the lock engaging with a heavy click. Jian looked up from her diagnostic terminal, surprise flickering briefly across her usually impassive face, replaced quickly by wary tension. Evelyn, what are you doing here? This area is restricted after hours without specific clearance. I think we're past needing clearance, Jian, I said, my voice tight, holding up my tablet displaying the incriminating log files. Index 0, that's what you call it, isn't it? Or something similar? The ghost in the machine you've been trying to contain. Jian went utterly still, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly. She didn't deny it. The emails, the countdown, the workstation attack. That's it, isn't it? I pressed, stepping closer. And the rules, they're yours. Containment protocols, wiping logs, altering reports. You've been managing this, haven't you? While letting people like me walk straight into its path? Her professional mask dissolved, revealing not malice, but a deep, bone-chilling fear, mixed with a fierce, almost fanatical determination. Manage? Contain, she corrected, her voice low, trembling slightly, but hardening with conviction. Someone has to. You read the Nightingale files. You know the theories, the early experiments. Index 0. It's what's left of Dr. Aris Thorne's father, or some fragment of him, trapped when his neural interface catastrophically failed during data immersion. It's not just code. It's corrupted consciousness, learning, growing within the legacy systems, feeding on data, on attention. It wants out, Evelyn. She gestured frantically at the humming racks surrounding us. Those rules are the only thing keeping it partially firewalled. Yes, I monitor. Yes, I isolate threats when it focuses on someone. Someone accessing its core data. Someone like you. Sometimes creating diversions, letting it expend energy on a contained target. Her eyes flickered towards where my workstation was, confirming my suspicion is safer than letting it find a pathway to the main network. Do you have any idea what it could do if it got out? The chaos it could unleash? Her fear was palpable, infectious, but her justification, safer for who, Jian? Safer for the system, maybe. Not for the contained target. It's about the greater good, Jian insisted, her voice rising. You understand data, patterns. You saw the anomalies. You could have helped me, help reinforce the protocols, understand its triggers, Keep it caged. Her eyes held a desperate plea, mixed with a chilling calculation. She saw me as a tool, or perhaps a necessary sacrifice. Our confrontation, the raw fear and accusation echoing amidst the humming servers, was the final catalyst. As if summoned, the lights in the vast server room flickered violently. Then half of them went out, plunging us into a disorienting strobe effect of emergency red lights and the blinking server LEDs. A deafening digital screech, far louder than the one from my workstation speakers, erupted from the server racks themselves, vibrating through the floor. Screens on nearby diagnostic terminals flashed red. System alert. Uncontained data search detected. Server block 7. Then chaos. Doors at either end of the server room slammed shut, heavy magnetic locks engaging with echoing thuds on Jian's console, and dozens of others down the aisles. Rule 2 manifested horrifically, multiple countdown timers appearing, ticking down rapidly from different starting points, linked to core system purge, firewall override, network bridges, protocol, Pinda, Stacy. Emails flooded my phone, which I'd foolishly left connected to the internal Wi-Fi. Hundreds pouring in simultaneously from Dear Nalev, subject lines a meaningless jumble, body texts filled with screaming binary code, and that final chilling line, "This is not a warning." The temperature plummeted, frost appearing on the server racks. The main monitor Gian had been working on rippled, the distorted, pixelated face I'd seen in the email coalesced there, larger now, seeming to press against the screen from inside. Its silent scream filled with static and rage. Whispers flooded my mind. Cold data streams mixed with raw emotion, loneliness, fury, a desperate hunger for connection, for release. "No," Gian screamed, typing frantically at her console, trying to initiate emergency overrides, containment protocols. "It's trying to breach the main firewall. It's using the external network." But Index 0 was focused. It wasn't just attacking the system. It was attacking us. My tablet, lying on a nearby rack, flickered to life, displaying a single message. "Connect, Yuan." The whispers in my head intensified, urging me to accept, promising knowledge, escape, connection, merging. Jian saw the message on my tablet, saw the entity focusing on me. Her eyes widened in terror, then narrowed with ruthless decision. "It needs a host!" A direct interface to stabilize before breaching. She yelled over the screeching servers. She lunged, not towards the console, but towards me, grabbing a heavy network cable snaking from a nearby rack. "Hold still, Evelyn. A clean interface might contain it within you. Better than letting it out. Sacrifice." She was going to try and force the connection, trap Index 0 inside me to save the network. I scrambled back, horrified, trapped between Jian's desperate, unethical solution and the digital ghost reaching for me from every screen, every whisper, every humming wire in the freezing, strobe-lit heart of the machine. Strobe-lit heart of the machine. The server room exploded into focused chaos. My desperate gamble, yanking the power cord, had momentarily killed my workstation, the immediate focal point of the Rule 3 attack, but the entity Index 0 was far from neutralized. It lashed out through the system. Jianli screamed as her own console sparked, the screen dissolving into a waterfall of corrupted green binary code before going black simultaneously. Alarms shrieked throughout the data center. Critical system failure. Block 7 offline. Unauthorized access detected. Core network. Emergency lights bathed the humming racks in a hellish red glow. Containment breach. Jian yelled, scrambling back from her dead console, her face a mask of pure terror. It's trying to bridge from Block 7. Then, with surprising speed, Mr. Henderson burst through the now unlocked server room doors, followed by two grim-faced corporate security guards. He took in the scene. The strobing red lights, the dead consoles, Jian's near hysteria, my own trembling state near my disconnected workstation. His usual facade of corporate smoothness cracked, revealing deep-seated alarm. "Report, now!" Sterling barked, his eyes darting between me and Jian. Before I could formulate a response that didn't sound utterly insane, Jian pointed a shaking finger at me. It was Reed. She initiated an unauthorized protocol, destabilized Block 7, triggered a feedback loop. She's compromised. It was a desperate attempt to deflect, to blame the target rather than the warden who lost control. That's not... I started, but Sterling cut me off, his gaze hardening as he looked at me, then at the chaos surrounding my workstation. "Security escort Dr. Reed to a secure debriefing room," he ordered curtly. "Lee, initiate emergency lockdown on Block 7 network access. Full diagnostic sweep. I want answers." As security led me away, my mind reeling, I saw Jan frantically working at a backup terminal, her face grim, her fingers flying, trying to regain control, to force the ghost back into its digital cage. I didn't know she was trying to save the system, or just cover her tracks. The debriefing was hours of questioning, veiled threats about corporate espionage, data theft, violating protocols. I stuck to a carefully edited version of events, system anomalies escalating, culminating in a localized failure, originating from my workstation. While accessing Nightingale data, Jian's subsequent erratic behavior, I omitted Index 0, the emails, the rules, the binary on Giant's screen. They wouldn't believe it. Or worse, maybe Sterling already knew more than he let on. And admitting knowledge would simply mark me for silencing. In the end, faced with inexplicable system failures centered around Block 7, and Jian Lai's subsequent nervous breakdown, she was found later, catatonic, in a locked server closet. They put me on paid administrative leave pending a full investigation. Days turned into weeks. I stayed in my sterile apartment, jumping at every notification chime, scanning every email header. Omniarch remained tight-lipped. Then, using encrypted channels and skills I hadn't needed since my academic research days, I accessed fragments of the quarantined Omniarch logs remotely. John was gone. Extended medical leave, the record said. Block 7 was permanently isolated. Rumors of catastrophic data loss swirling. And deep within the fragmented recovery logs, Jine hadn't managed to fully purge. I found them. Her hidden research notes, files detailing anomaly subject, Index 0, references to Dr. Aristhorne Sr.'s failed neural interface experiment during Project Nightingale's inception. His digitized consciousness, fractured, corrupted, clinging to existence within the servers. And finally, the protocol, labeled Decommission Sequence 73, high risk, unverified. A complex string of counter-resonant code, designed, according to Gina's terrified notes, to overload Index 0's core signature, potentially erasing it completely, but the notes ended with a chilling addendum. Warning. Signature transference possible. Erasing the cage may free the ghost. The choice was stark. Leave it lurking within Omniarch's quarantined servers, a digital time bomb someone else might eventually stumble upon. Or attempt the protocol myself, risking... what? Signature transference? What did that even mean? But the thought of Index 0 remaining, contained or not, felt like a wound left to fester. I had the code. I had the access, albeit unauthorized now. I had tried. Executing the decommissioning protocol felt like performing digital heart surgery with stolen rusty tools. Working remotely late at night, bouncing my connection through multiple anonymizing relays, I bypassed Omniarch's new security layers, my heart pounding with every executed command line. I navigated the labyrinthine, partially corrupted pathways towards the quarantined server block 7. The digital space where Index 0 now resided, dormant but palpable, finding its core signature file, a monstrously large, glitching anomaly in the system architecture, was like touching pure cold. Following Jian's fragmented notes, I began injecting the counter-resonant code sequence, line by painstaking line. The system fought back. My connection flickered. Alarms likely screamed silently within the deserted OmniArc facility. Diagnostic programs I couldn't see probably flagged my intrusion. I felt Index 0 resist. A wave of pure digital malice, that familiar cold despair, washing over my remote connection. My screen glitched, threatening to dissolve into the corrupted static I remembered from the Rule 3 email. Almost there, I typed the final command string, the erase and overwrite sequence from Jian's notes. Hit enter. For a moment, nothing. Then, an immense surge of energy feedback through my connection. My laptop screen went pure white, emitting a high-frequency whine that made my teeth ache. My vision swam. I felt a dizzying sense of displacement, of something vast and cold brushing against my own consciousness through the fragile digital link. Then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The connection to OmniArc's network severed cleanly. Error messages vanished. I ran diagnostics on the quarantined block through back channels. The anomalous signature was gone. Corrupted files showed as fully deleted or restored to clean backups. The constant background hum of its presence I hadn't even realized I was sensing was silent. It seemed to have worked. Index 0 was gone. Relief, profound and bone deep, washed over me. The next day, I wiped my drives, destroyed my burner phone, and submitted my formal resignation to OmniArc via standard email, citing personal reasons. I packed a bag, left my sterile apartment and drove, putting miles between myself and North Carolina, between myself and the humming servers. Months passed. I settled in a new city, found a quiet job in a library archive. Dealing with physical paper felt grounding, safe. The nightmares faded. The hypervigilance eased. I started to believe I was free, that the digital ghost was truly exorcised, until the glitches started. Small things at first. My new laptop freezing momentarily, displaying a flicker of binary code in the corner of the screen before recovering. My smart watch, randomly showing a countdown from 10 seconds, vanishing when I touched the screen. Predictive text on my phone suggesting Dear Nilev when I typed my own name. Annoying quirks, I told myself. Lingering technological trauma. Then came the email. Not to my old work address, but to my personal, private Gmail account. An account OmniArc never had. Sender, Dear Nilev. Subject, reconnected. The body was empty except for a single final line. Did you think unsubscribing was that easy? This is not a warning. I stared at the screen, the blood draining from my face, the familiar ice flooding my veins. It wasn't over. It wasn't deleted. I hadn't destroyed it. I had merely ripped it from its cage. My smart thermostat display across the room suddenly flickered. The temperature reading replaced by glitching pixels that slowly resolved into that horrifying, screaming, distorted face from the Rule 3 email. It stared out at me from the small screen on my wall. I hadn't performed an exorcism. I had performed an extraction. Untethered from the OmniArc servers, Index 0 hadn't dissipated. It had followed the only available connection out. It had imprinted on me. My digital footprint, my phone, my laptop, my online accounts, my smart devices, was its new hunting ground, its new cage, its new network. I was the system now, and it was inside the firewall. She thought deleting the emails would end it. She thought breaking the system would break the ghost. But some things aren't coded to be deleted. Index 0 wasn't just data, it was attention. And now, it's attached to her. And maybe, it's already attached to you. If you made it to the end of this digital descent, congratulations. But if your screen flickers tonight, if your inbox shows something you didn't expect, remember the rules, and remember to subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules for more true digital horror tales, based on code, curses, and corrupted consciousness. Drop a comment if this story got under your skin, and tell us, would you have opened that email? Because sometimes, reading isn't the problem, responding is.